threat. I must as always point out that this is entirely my own speculation, but as usual I feel it's reasonably logical of an assumption given what we know combined with no other substantially contradictory evidence. The point being that the Eldar were just for the longest time doing their own thing. The warp had been locked away, and that's another thing I need to talk about some more. The Necron were sleeping, and this left the Eldar with complete dominion across the galaxy. Like all empires, they slowly, over vast periods of time, began to slide into a slower, decadent, more moral decay, and that was apparently left unchecked. And by the time it had become established enough to be obviously offensive to many within Eldar society, it was already too entrenched to do anything about it. But the Eldar were truly masters of all. Like the humanity in the Golden Age, they had very little to worry about. Their technology was so advanced, they were able to basically print matter. They had all manner of machines to do any kind of work which was required, and on top of this, they feared for nothing, which you would expect from a race which were able to destroy planets and then rebuild them at will. Any enemy to their mind could be easily extinguished. In fact, discoveries have been made that suggest the Eldar during this golden period had developed their understanding of psychic power and how this can be channeled into the material realm. Though they actually had developed technology whereby they were able to simply think of a thing and it would be born into existence. And this could be, say, an infantry grav tank, a titan, a starship, theoretically even an entire planet. So they would connect themselves to this machine, they imagine this thing, and there it is. Now the power of this is obviously terrifying to even consider. Now if you want to read more about that specifically, and I'll say thanks here to the community who helped me to pinpoint that as the book Fist of Demetrius, because I knew I could remember it from somewhere, but I couldn't remember that specific book. This is where some Imperials find an ancient complex with a machine that allows things to be materialized seemingly out of thin air. It's a very interesting point of the lore, so it's worth looking up. It's a good read. The main thing though to understand is that the Eldar before the fall were an extremely advanced race both in mind, spirit and physically. They have senses far beyond a human, they can move like lightning faster than human eyes are barely able to perceive, and their emotions are so strong if a human had to try and process them, it would either send them insane or they'd just break down into mental jelly. Now unbeknownst to the Eldar, who had for millions of years existed with the warp as their source of power, things were stirring in the immaterium, dark things. And it's important to remember that what feeds the warp the most is excess of emotion. So many people are quick to assume that the Eldar played a great role in creating the dark gods of chaos through the war in heaven. And the best assumption about this is that this is not entirely untrue, but it's also not accurate to say this definitively as just a default assumption. The Eldar, you see, because of their extremely powerful emotions, have always been aware of this having some level of destructive capability, and so they learn to control this, both in battle and throughout their lives. Another thing to remember is that when humans die, their souls feed into the warp. Pre-fall for the Eldar, this was not the case. Eldar souls are not the same as human souls, and the Eldar would be reborn over and over. So for them, events like the war in heaven did not contribute billions and billions of souls to the warp, and at the same time neither did the Necron tier, because their souls were consumed by the C'tan. So this is a fundamental error people make when they're assuming that the war in heaven created the Chaos Gods, when nearly every aspect of it appears to have been not that significant in contributing to the warp. Now, it undoubtedly will have had some effect, of course, because the C'tan were going around destroying planets. However, they were also feeding off of the souls of the living creatures there. This is another mistake often people make when they say, well, the C'tan were destroying all these planets and it was destruction everywhere. How could that not have fed into the warp? Again, because that was the whole reason why the C'tan were attacking those planets, was to siphon the soul and the energy of the living beings. So that stuff didn't go into the warp. Of course, their suffering and anguish and all these other things did. That undoubtedly contributed and fed into the warp there. But again, where did it reach a tipping point? How long did it take to reach the level where Chaos Gods became active? We don't know this. The point is that the Eldar up until the dawn of mankind would have certainly had some impact on the warp, but despite their powerful emotions, it seems that this was less of an impact than when humans began slaughtering each other en masse and feeding souls directly into the warp and breeding like rabbits in the process. While all humans, with the exception of nulls, have some psychic presence, the Eldar of course have a powerful psychic presence because of their very nature. And this means that from the warp's perspective, Eldar souls are white-hot, burning beacons, whereas humans are merely tiny distant specks of light, barely more than particles of dust picked out in a beam of light. Except that until the dawn of Slaanesh, this had never really been that important, but of course all that would soon change. Similarly to humanity in its golden age, but perhaps even more so, life for the Eldar at the height of their power was beyond what you could describe as paradise. Their lives were without any kind of stress or trouble, they held total dominion over the galaxy, and they wanted for nothing. They spent their time indulging entirely in creative pastimes, be they artistic, physical recreation, mental, speculative, philosophical discussions, literature. Their psychic manifestations dealt with everything, and remembering that at this time most of Eldar society was based on planets, not in the craft worlds that we see today. They also had discovered and learned how to make use of the webway, the vast system of psychic tunnels which exist outside of the materium and immaterium. An important side note, to travel through the webway quickly requires psychic energy, otherwise it will take much more time to traverse. You can still travel through it, but much like any psychic weapon, to get the most power from it, you need to imbue it with psychic energy, otherwise it's just plain and not especially effective. The webway was of course constructed by the Old Ones, and the means of its construction and repair taught to the Eldar. It was believed that they had mapped it to a degree, but this knowledge was deemed so great, it is now only kept in the Eldar Black Library, hidden deep in the webway, its route only known to a select few of their kind. Some even suggest that the webway paths could also stretch forwards and backwards in time. The Eldar themselves understood the danger of this, and so never used these temporal aspects. And there is more to discuss about that, but we'll probably have to get to that another time. The webway though enabled them to travel safely between their worlds, never having to really use space or the warp. And this is another thing people often don't think of when they say, well, how come the Eldar didn't conflict with humanity? Well, for one reason, because they weren't travelling with starships all around the galaxy, and they weren't travelling with ships all through the warp like humanity had to do. Because they do of course have sub-light speed ships, but unlike other races who usually involve the warp to traverse those vast distances, the Eldar have no need to do this. Because why would you travel in real space or warp space across these vast distances when you can just step through the webway and be there in a fraction of the time in total safety? So this is one fairly simple reason as to why Eldar-human interaction early on appears to have been very, very minimal. There's nothing mysterious or misleading about it, they simply didn't encounter one another that often. It's not to say that they never had conflicts or interaction, but such awkward confrontations were clearly minimal, otherwise the consequences would undoubtedly be more well defined even if you're allowing for the Dark Age and the Age of Strife. One key factor as well is that it's not heavily established what kind of overarching societal structure existed in this pre-fall period. One thing we do know is that it seems to have been relatively dispersed, that is to say that it had something of a clan-like culture. This is played out as well by how this continues to this day, and the craft worlds, the craft world Eldar, are likely the same groups who existed during the pre-fall Eldar culture. And this cultural layout undoubtedly meant that similarly to our world and the fog which exists between countries in terms of just what is going on, meant that as Eldar culture began to change, it likely was not immediately clear that this was happening, and even when things began to grow more extreme, how much this would have been commented to other parts of the Eldar civilization as a whole is really unknown. For the Eldar that live now in the time of the Imperium, this lifestyle of carefree indulgence in technology has been completely lost. If you wanted a modern analogy that's actually pretty apt, you might say that the Eldar in the 41st and 42nd millennia are living lives effectively under psychic lockdown compared to where they were previously. They're largely confined to their craft worlds. They avoid interaction with other races other than their own as much as possible. The Eldar lost so much because, for one, so many of their worlds were annihilated instantly at the birth of Slaanesh, but also because much Eldar tech relies heavily, if not exclusively, on psychic power. Since their beginning, the Eldar had bathed in the warp and focused all their attention on how to use this to build and develop their culture. This is not something to be overlooked. While the Eldar do understand science, as do humans because they are an advanced race, they never went through that same process of research and industry and mechanical fabrication as humanity has. In fact, there probably are things that they don't understand which humans do. They instead base their culture on Wraithbone, a psi-plastic based on warp energy crafted by what are known as bone singers. Whereas the Imperium is based on Golden Age knowledge that is heavily science and mechanically focused, the Eldar use psychic power and the warp for almost everything. But because they're so weakened and fearful of attracting the attention of Slaanesh, this greatly limits them in terms of what they can use. It's still a lot more than other races, but nowhere near what they would have been doing pre-fall. And this is one reason why they are so hamstrung in the 41st and 42nd millennium. And then of course we come to the Dark Eldar. For the Dark Eldar, things are very different. Essentially, their fear of Slaanesh led to a very severe decline in the use of psychic power, and this has then caused their ability to effectively, if at all, use psychic power to completely atrophy. Now, as I said before, it's not entirely clear what kind of power structure the Eldar had pre-fall. They appear to have had some sense of nobility, respected elders that seemed somewhat divided by what could be described as clans. Probably the best way to think of them is similar to the period of Greek city-states, where there was no real central government, but they were still informally united. Their specific areas were independent. This seems to be somewhat of a reasonable comparison to pre-fall Eldar. It's likely that far back in ancient Eldar history, they were more united as a single people, but over time they fragmented into specific areas doing their own thing. And basically they had much in common, language, collective history, and so on, and for the longest time there was really no need to form some huge overarching government, because simply there was no need. You usually have some kind of overarching structure to handle things and deal with threats and make some kind of collective decisions because it's necessary. But the Eldar didn't need this. Their lives were provided for, and within their very specific regions, decisions were probably made by just a council of elders. That's elders, not Eldar. It probably didn't need to be any more complicated than that, and if it did, they probably would have grouped up and come together, but most of the time that was never necessary. So as time progressed, this fragmented structure probably made it more difficult for them to develop a consensus on how to avoid the problems that were beginning to occur in their society, in the social sense. And in all probability, this probably actually made them far worse of a problem, with some worlds starting to fall into ruin, others had some sense of what might be coming, but they didn't really see elsewhere what was happening, and others were just in between. So the Eldar have become grossly indulgent as a people. But early on, it's nothing more than that. They just have become decadent. And this then arguably inevitably leads many to begin craving such a lifestyle of excess. And to use one of my always favourite close at hand quotes, some Eldar factions or clans sought to become explorers in the further regions of experience. That is to say, they began experimenting with pain as much as pleasure, and perhaps a combination of both. As with all addictive vices, this slowly began to spiral out of control. Those practicing such indulgence lost sight of things and became more and more perverse. Eldar society was overall now rotting morally and ethically, like some virus spreading through their culture. Some worlds were entirely consumed by this attitude, others were less so. But everywhere they had transitioned from lives of relatively innocent excess and indulgence to now truly abhorrent and perverted acts that were intended to be extreme enough to satisfy the ever more desensitized senses of the slowly darkening Eldar. In the beginning, the core of Eldar society were not distinctly aware of what was happening, because much of this slide into depravity was happening behind closed doors. Cults and strange societies were being whispered about in the streets. We can imagine how such things can happen. It begins with tentative conversations, questions, probing to see if you're a good fit for the group. Once trust is gained, you get an invite to a meeting, and it's downhill from there.
Like fantasy? You're gonna love this. Join forces with your friends in clan events and boss battles.
Over time, these groups became more brazen. They might publicly test the waters with their morally questionable activities, seek to diminish it as extreme, so that society slowly becomes numb and exhausted by these conversations about these groups, then a little bit more and a little bit more, and finally it's too late. It would only be those who are known today as the Exodites who started to understand early enough the direction things were headed in, and you could very much consider them the doomsday preppers of the Eldar, because they saw the writing on the wall and were basically like, we're getting the hell out of here, and began to retreat to worlds that were very much on the periphery of Eldar society and the galaxy, selecting worlds to settle on where they could keep well out the way of what was coming. More than this though, the Exodites were also essentially doom prophets, and as most doom prophets are, they were dismissed out of hand by the majority of society, who just did not want to admit or even consider at such an early stage that they had a major problem on the horizon. And this was one of the weaknesses of the Eldar, that their sheer unbridled arrogance and ego, and as I often say, it's all too commonly the nature of things that people never want to change a comfortable way of life and react to a situation until it is literally too late to do anything about it, and you can take your pick of real world examples because they're so readily available. Unfortunately, these doom-mongering calls of the Exodites were brushed off as being either puritanical ranting or a disingenuous project of fear-mongering that would surely not come to pass. The counter-argument of the Eldar pleasure cults would be a, well, what's the worst thing that can happen, rationale. What came next was the beginning of a total breakdown in the Eldar civilization that saw their formerly casually united worlds become more and more polarized, and this is when many began to see that things were not going in a stable direction and began advocating for an end to the excessive lack of self-control that these dark pleasure cults were displaying, and the other side, of course, pointing back ever more viciously, screaming that they could do whatever they want, and regardless, what were they going to do about it anyway? Now, you might have thought that this would be where a civil war could break out, but it seems that the Eldar, trying to avoid a further downward spiral, understood that such a thing was not going to be helpful or improve the situation in any way. Plus, if that's how things went down, it was probably already then past a point of that being able to constructively save the situation. But arguments begin to break out more and more to try and rationalize things. Some despair about how their lives have no meaning because they no longer seek to move forward or struggle for anything, and while those in the opposite camp would posit that it is in fact exactly their lives of extreme endless experience that must exist to honour those who could not have achieved such things before, and that this was in fact entirely the pinnacle of lifestyle that they had always sought to achieve. They were doing the right thing, and they should embrace this and continue to push it forward. As things continue to deteriorate though, they of course become progressively worse. You hear descriptions of the darker aspects of Eldar society no longer being satisfied with just pleasuring and experimenting among themselves. This is where we begin to hear of the earliest gangs of the pleasure cults capturing innocents, dragging them back to be preyed upon, tortured for days or weeks or months in the most perverse and creative ways imaginable. By now, the Exodite Eldar are long gone, having abandoned their civilization, believing it to be a completely lost cause. This is also where we begin to see parts of Eldar's civilization moving from their planets to resettle further out. We also have the first Guardians who strive to reinforce the traditional Eldar way of a more pure lifestyle, but with violent actions if necessary, but nothing really that amounts to more than just vigilante action, nothing more unified than this. And then you begin to finally see the creation of craft worlds, bastions designed to house only those of pure spirit, created out of a necessity, as their worlds are now being ravaged by those individuals consumed by dark excess. The craft worlds would of course in time become replacements for the broken worlds of the Eldar that now contained little more than the remnants of what wonder and glory had come before. And as they begin to reach the end of days, Eldar society is in a complete state of collapse. Many worlds are now in essence entirely consumed by nightmarish horror and dark cults who have turned the once glorious worlds of the Eldar into brutal hunting grounds. Ruined wastelands of suffering populated by deranged individuals who scavenge night and day in total desperation to feed their insatiable addiction to pleasure and suffering, that they can now only indulge in by the most extreme acts to try and elicit any small sense of feeling. The members of these dark cults have become basically numb to any feeling now, be that pleasure or pain, and this numbness only pushes them further and further to imagine by what means can they possibly feel that rush, that mental saturation of emotion, and their only means to now achieve this is to enact in the truest sense the most unimaginable horrors on their victims. As the power of these dark cults continued to grow across the worlds of the Eldar, and as some of their activities became ever more extreme, for whatever reason it was seen as being sensible to relocate into the webway. And this move by some of these cults in what is still essentially the pre-fall toward the webway is what I'll simply refer to from here on as the Dark Eldar, because they then begin to commandeer hidden ports and they set up strongholds at key webway junctions to ensure the security of their debased pursuits. So this is important to understand because it can sometimes have a sense that the decay of the Eldar was a chaotic anarchy where psychopaths were just running wild, and that's not entirely untrue. However, those at the higher level certainly had a more ordered sense of their debased pleasures in these darkened cults, the Dark Eldar. These webway junctions and access points were all connected to a vast, sprawling city constructed inside the webway itself, and this was the Eldar city of Camorra. Camorra was originally the greatest of the webway port cities, just of the Eldar, and it was able to transport a fleet to any of the most vital planets of the collective empire by virtue of its many webway portals. Because of this access it granted to far-flung corners of the Materium, it was seen as being the most important location in the entire webway. As such, it was too important for any singular state of the Eldar councils to control, so it was instead operated on a more autonomous basis. Because of this, it meant that suspect activities that might not have been possible under the formerly well-organised worlds of the Eldar were far more possible here. Largely due to its high value as a hub within the webway, Camorra inevitably expanded quickly, in fact so much so that as it spread outward into the void, it began to consume other webway port cities, estates and sub-realms. Camorra grew larger and more impressive as it fed on and plundered resources. All of this, of course, remaining largely unseen. The self-serving lords who at this time ruled Camorra's dens of vice grew in status alongside their adoptive city, initiating more and more of the Eldar into their shadowy depths. It was much through necessity as it was need that Camorra became a place of focus for the dark cults of the Eldar, the Dark Eldar. It suited their needs perfectly in every respect. Out of sight, out of mind. So when Slaanesh was finally born into the warp, the psychic shockwave that consumed trillions of Eldar and billions more besides tore reality asunder as the Eye of Terror appeared upon the galaxy as a breach ripped between the Materium and Immaterium. Whole star systems fell into orgies of horrific cannibalism and violence. The majority of the Eldar race was wiped out in an instant. No matter they were dark cultists or pure Eldar trying to turn back the tide of despair, all were consumed by a cataclysm of terror and pain. Many Eldar planets were either destroyed or violently sucked into the warp itself. In its place now stood a maelstrom of chaos. The Slaanesh gorged upon the incomprehensible, all-consuming agony of the Eldari, and the warp storms that had plagued the galaxy would finally abate. There was no force capable of constraining this event. Slaanesh was such a powerful creation that it consumed the Eldar gods of their ancient mythology. The few Eldar survivors were now left scattered across the galaxy, and for the longest time in a deep shock, unable to comprehend the true horror of what had befallen them. Most of all, their inability to prevent it had deeply scarred their sense of superiority and invincibility. But worse would be to come, of course, when they discovered that they were unable to be reborn as they always had been, and were now to some degree mortal entities like the filthy monkey of humanity. Those souls of the Eldar, obliterated by the birth of Slaanesh, were now the captives of She Who Thirsts, and they would endure endless suffering at its behest. While Slaanesh extinguished the pure and the depraved alike who had inhabited real space, this was not the case for those who remained in the webway. However, the birth of Slaanesh was so powerful that its psychic shockwaves were felt even in the webway, and it suffered terrible damage from the blast that tore holes through it, ruined some pathways forever, and damaged Eldar constructs within it. Those who had established themselves in and around the area of the webway containing Camorra survived, and suffered minimal, if any, damage. Like the Craftworld Eldar, the Exodites, the Harlequins, they had escaped the unbelievable horror of Slaanesh. Unlike many Eldar who continued to exist in real space, the Eldar of Camorra felt no need for repentance or atonement. They saw no need to alter their ways, unlike the Puritan Eldar who even now were restructuring their civilization and developing new strict paths to follow. These were alien concepts to a people who acknowledged no limit to their power or capabilities, and soon enough, though both the surviving Eldar and Dark Eldar would discover there was a continuing dire problem for them. They had both discovered to their horror that they were no longer able to be reborn through the warp as they had been for millions of years, but for the Dark Eldar they discovered something even more disturbing. Now, I don't want to go too heavy on this, is what I originally wrote for the intro to this section, then I scripted out enough for an entire standalone video. So, instead, I've tried to distill down the essence of what I originally wanted to say, and that is a rough sense of the Eldar rebirth and their soul. The fall created a situation where the Eldar could no longer be reincarnated, and secondary to that, it's also important to note that it is clearly stated that Eldar gestation takes considerably longer than that of what are referred to as lesser races, be that other humanoids. For the Drukhari, for the Dark Eldar, traditional trueborn children are extremely rare and something of a status symbol in their society. In relation to this, descriptions of a longer gestation is not clarified any further. However, My speculation is that given the fact this description points towards the possibility of it being very difficult to conceive, it made me wonder if Eldar do not bear comparison to fictional worlds like Children of Men, Handmaid's Tale, where conception becomes very difficult as a species and children are valued extremely highly. Unlike those dystopian worlds, perhaps this was not some devastating biological change for the Eldar. Perhaps it was a naturally designed aspect of their race, because we know that the Eldar were created by either careful design or some general shove in the right direction by the Old Ones in the earliest period for the galaxy. In the most ancient of times, it seems the case that the Eldar were able to just respawn in the warp. This could be a reason why they didn't need normal or effective means of conception, or perhaps it was even intentional to ensure that they didn't run rampant and become too big of a problem for the Old Ones, who, let's remember, didn't plan on being exterminated by the Necron and Catan. And when you think about this more, there is some sense to that. You design a powerful psychic race, but you want them to work for you, not against you. So you enable them to be continually reborn and walk out of the warp, but you don't want them procreating constantly, as this could create some problems for you. Later, when the Old Ones are destroyed and the warp is cut off, that low conception rate becomes a far bigger problem. Still, this time for the Eldar is so shrouded, it's very difficult to make solid conclusions, and I'll expand on that further separately. What we do know is that for Eldar conception, it's difficult and it takes a long time, so they cannot easily replenish their race. On top of that, there are other issues, because the fall allowed them the realization that if any Eldar died, their soul would be consumed by Slaanesh. But for the Dark Eldar, it was much more than that. They realized their souls were also being drained very slowly by Slaanesh because of the Eldari intrinsic connection to the warp itself, and they found that it was leeching their soul energy, if you will. And this is where the Soul Stones or the Spirit Stones come in. You see, Craftworld Eldar do not seem to suffer this same soul drain effect that the Dark Eldar do, but they do wear Spirit Stones that protect their soul. The idea being that should they die, it will capture their soul into the Spirit Stone, and this can then be placed within the Infinity Circuit on an Eldar craft world, which it's assumed is basically like a self-contained pre-fall warp space of a sort. It's an artificial place where the souls of dead Eldar are placed to coalesce and remain safe from the darkness of the warp and Slaanesh. And this is obviously an overview. There's more detail to all of these elements. Now, another reason why Craftworld Eldar may be cautious about bearing children is that any Eldar, including Trueborn Eldar, will need a new Spirit Stone to protect them from Slaanesh, and Spirit Stones cannot be just fashioned, nor can they be repurposed. They can only be found on one of the Crone Worlds. These are ancient Eldar planets which now reside either in the Warp or the Eye of Terror, so gathering Spirit Stones is not only extremely difficult, it's also incredibly dangerous, and even though the Eldar will often use wraiths to achieve this, it's sometimes just more trouble than it's worth. So without readily available Spirit Stones, or even at best very few, this isn't helpful to creating many new Eldar. And this is actually something very important to understand in relation to just Eldar in general, that they can't just have suddenly millions of new children, because it would be extremely perilous for those children were they to die without Spirit Stones. All this really comes down to understanding that Eldar souls are different to most mortal races, as I often say. They're more powerful, more enduring, and most importantly, they're less directly connected. They're seemingly able to detach from one mortal vessel and connect to another, and this appears to be very much by design, if their ancient myths and legends of the Eldar origins have any truth to them at all. But why am I talking so much about Craftworld Eldar? Well, because context. You kind of need to understand that to understand Dark Eldar. The Drakari suffer what is referred to as this soul drain or a spirit leech. This means that they're constantly bleeding their life force to Slaanesh, and this is one reason as to why the Dark Eldar are unable to use Spirit Stones as the Craftworld Eldar do, because this soul bleed seems to corrupt Spirit Stones. It blackens them and makes them unusable. Also, Spirit Stones are usually given to Eldar when they are very young, and it forms an extremely close connection to the Eldar soul. They become one and the same in many ways, so that the nanosecond their soul leaves the body, it enters the Spirit Stone. Most Dark Eldar are by this point very old, and to try and connect them with a Spirit Stone is not only extremely dangerous to them, but it's also very unlikely to be successful, so they just don't use Spirit Stones. But with that said, they do have other uses for them. For example, an Incubi, a warrior order of the Drakari, whose sole goal is to kill as often as they can, it's said that they, as initiates, must kill a Craft World aspect warrior in single combat, shatter their Spirit Stone, and return it to their hierarch. When this task is completed, only then can they be fully inducted as an Incubus. The Sundered Spirit Stone is rebuilt into a psychic torture device known as a Tormentor and mounted to the Incubus chest, where it exudes an aura of terror and malice that penetrates the minds of even the most dauntless foes. The bottom line is that for one reason and another, Dark Eldar do not use Spirit Stones. In fact, they have other means to return to life and not be captured by Slaanesh. This also feeds into the understanding that Eldar souls, like I say, not like human souls. They don't just fall like a drop of rain into an ocean. Eldar souls are much more stable and persistent and independent entities. They're almost like a permanent life force that's very difficult to extinguish and can be moved around. But before we go any further, what exactly is this soul leeching? Why does it appear to affect only the Drakari and not the Craft World Eldar? Well, the answer is actually more complicated than you might think, and this unfortunately is another thing that is not especially clear. However, I did remember that there is some reference to this in an older text known as the Introspections Upon Perfection by Caesandrus the Anchorite, a Craft World Eldar, and it comes in 3 parts as follows. Life is to us as the maze of Linnaean was to Ulthanesh, its mysterious corridors leading to wondrous vistas and nightmarish encounters in equal measure. Each of us must walk the maze alone, treading in the footsteps of those that came before, but also forging new routes through the labyrinth of existence. In times past we were drawn to the darkest secrets and ran wild about the maze, seeking to experience all that it had to offer. As individuals and as a civilization, we lost our way and in doing so created the means for our doom, unfettered exploration leading to the darkness of the fall. In the emptiness that followed, a new way was revealed to us, the path. Through the wisdom of the path, we spend our lives exploring the meaning of existence, moving from one part of the maze to another with discipline and guidance so that we never become lost again. On the path, we experience the full potential of love and hate, joy and woe, lust and purity, filling our lives with experience and fulfillment but never succumbing to the shadows that lurk within our thoughts. But like all journeys, the path is different for each of us. Some wander for a long while in one place, some spread their travels wide and visit many places for a short time, while others remain for a long time to explore every nook and turn. Some of us lose our way and leave the path for a time or forever, and some of us find dead ends and become trapped. In the spring storms of youth, it is common amongst our people to question the validity and indeed sanity of our ways, most especially the pursuit of perfection in but one field of endeavour at a time, the path, as it has been called since our ancestors created it. While the young are intellectually capable of studying the tragic lessons of the fall and the great enemy unleashed by our ancestors, their view of the universe is too narrow to truly see the lessons intrinsic in the terrible events which destroyed our homeworlds and drove forth as survivors to wander the stars. It is true of all that in youth there is great bravery and great foolishness in equal measure, an abiding belief that no obstacle is too great to overcome, no foe too mighty to defeat, no problem so complex that it cannot be solved. Conversely, it may be said that those who survive the galaxy's tumult for long enough come to believe that all obstacles, foes and problems may not be resolved, only allayed for a brief sliver of history, which in turn is but an instant in the slow dance of the universe. Thus it is that young and old clash incessantly over the necessity of the path. The young rail against the restrictions it imposes upon them, much as our forebears did. They wish to taste every sensation, every emotion within their newfound world as soon as possible. They do not fear the great enemy that was created by the desires of our ancestors, for their whole conception of her evil is gleaned from distant tales and legends, and that which brought fear in the nursery is spurned and ridiculed in adolescence. Only with time can they begin to feel the terrible thirst which we gave her and begin to understand that she is a mirror image, a reflection of our worst excesses given life by the debauchery and depravity which preceded the fall. Long ago our race realised that the only way to elude the great enemy was to shatter the reflection, to live a life of denial and focus upon but one aspect of life, pursuing it unto perfection. That is anathema to the young, just as it is to the great enemy. The young do not desire the discipline of the path, but rather the curiosity drives them to try every fruit from the tree. Thus it is that so many take the path of wandering, or the path of damnation in their first years of adulthood, and so the great tragedy of our kind is played out again and again as the number of our people shrink from generation to generation. The greatest truth about the path is the simplest to say and yet the hardest to comprehend. In this profound moment comes the realization of the genius of the Azurian and the flaw in their genius. There is only one path, and it binds us together. We seers may pick apart the strands until we reach the infinitesimally small details, but their presence is a distraction to the overall flow of the scheme. Be you poet or dreamer or mourner, warrior, seer or outcast, as the events in your life are but threads in the cord of your fate, so your whole life is but a thread in the cord of the fate of the Eldar. We all walk the path as a single species, and as a collective, we must learn to control our passions and our fears together, or face destruction from one and the same. Now that is quite a long meditative piece, but it gives us some critical information once you dissect it. In the foreword, this line which states, "On the path we experience the full potential, but never succumbing to the shadows that lurk within our thoughts." In the second piece, where it talks about many Eldar not truly understanding the nature of things until they experience it for themselves. Only with time can they begin to feel the terrible thirst which we gave her and begin to understand she's a mirror image, a reflection of our worst excesses, given life by the debauchery and depravity which preceded the fall. Long ago our race realised that the only way to elude the great enemy was to shatter the reflection, to live a life of denial and focus upon but one aspect of life, pursue it unto perfection. It then also mentions about how the tragedy of the fall plays out over and over, that their numbers shrink from generation to generation. And this also lends weight to my belief that the Eldar not only have low numbers of children, but those that they do have, even if they've got protected by soul stones, they are still corrupted by the thirst of Slaanesh, initially. Perhaps for some of them this corrupts their soul stone, and if they become lost then to Slaanesh. But you also get the sense that they try to teach their young about the dangers of Slaanesh, but that no amount of study can prepare for them its true power and horror. In the afterword, it finishes by underscoring the fact that as a single species, we all walk the path or face destruction one and the same. So these three pieces by Cassandras give us some deep insight, that in fact the Craftworld Eldar are not immune to the soul drain that the Dark Eldar suffer. This is something that actually affects all Eldar. It's just that the Craftworld Eldar's path of focus and discipline and not abject horror seems to steer them clearly away from this. However, for their younger children, they don't understand this until it's often too late, as described where it says, "Understand, she is a mirror image, a reflection of our worst excesses given life by the debauchery and depravity." What this suggests to me is that if you align yourself with the lifestyle of excess and ultimately perverse behaviour, which is in line with Slaanesh, then you stare into the mirror, into the darkness, and she'll bleed your soul into the warp, or something to that effect anyway. The Dark Eldar discovered this soul siphoning process soon after the fall, but far from avoiding it, they developed their own methods to deal with such problems, and that is to allow the siphon to function. But be they Drakari children or adult, instead of trying to stop this process, they just decided, hey, why not just continually fill up the vessel so it never runs dry? Simple. Except that in order to achieve this, a life of meditation, discipline, sobriety and abstinence are definitely not required aspects for the path of the Dark Eldar. Indeed, quite the opposite. Oh, and of course, therein lies the prospect that should Aeneid be born, the Craftworld Eldar of the path may face a soul siphon of their own. But as I said at the start of the chapter, it's a theory/story that I'll have to get into another time. So the Drakari discovered soon enough that through their extreme acts they were able to satisfy the thirst of Slaanesh that drained their very spirits. This is where Commorragh becomes the centre of their world and existence. Similarly to the Craftworld Eldar, the Dark Eldar have nowhere else to go. They become entirely focused on satisfying their ever-draining souls and their constant need to engage in decadent depravity. The Dark Eldar had now become little more than sadistic parasites who subsist upon the anguish of others in order to prevent the slow death of their immortal souls. 10,000 years later, in the 41st millennium, Slaanesh's thirst pulls at them still. There truly is no escape. The Drakari have unwittingly doomed themselves, exchanging a horrific but mercifully swift end for an eternity of ghoulish starvation. And this is how the Drukhari became raiders of mortal souls. Their appearance can change visibly dependent on how long it's been since they quenched the thirst that's constantly eating at their souls. Those who have not drank of the suffering of others will appear visibly gaunt, even by the standards of the already bone-thin Eldar. Their skin can seem dry and withered, their bodies more frail. For those who have drank of the torment of others will glow with an aura of perfection. Their skin cold but glistening with life, but not. They can appear like a shadow to some, for they are inside empty shells, and all they exist for is to fill that void. It's worth additionally noting, quite importantly, that the innate psychic abilities of their straight as an arrow brethren have deteriorated to a point beyond where they are now able to be used. To channel the energies of the warp and chaos really within Commorragh would be to invite disaster, and so the Dark Eldar do not use psychic powers. Of course, this is somewhat problematic considering they exist within the webway, but we'll come to that. Although it is manufactured instead of psychically grown, the weaponry of the Dark Eldar is just as advanced as that used on Eldar Craftworld. In matters of war, the Dark Eldar are artisans. Their imagination and skill has led them down a sinister path. Their favourite tools of war include splinter weapons that can set every nerve aflame with pain, beams of darklight, whips that bleed acidic ichor, and eldritch soul traps. The Dark Eldar are so focused on the agony of others that their lightweight bodysuits even incorporate bladed plates, not only for protection, but also to give them yet another weapon to use upon their prey. The warriors of Commorragh know each and every possible action by which they're able to kill others who inhabit the galaxy, and they delight in perfecting and refining their skills. The Drukhari have abandoned the material dimension long ago, and when they do emerge from their gated fortress city, it's only to prey upon their unwitting victims who truly have no concept of what horrors await them. They'll rarely dirty their tongues with the savage grunting languages of lesser races, but instead use translators where they must communicate. For the Dark Eldar, every aspect of their characters is pushed to the extreme, including their condescending arrogance. Drukhari cabals assault the feeble lesser races in piratical raids as they plunge down upon the worlds that they will harvest, with whole armies screaming from their warp portals into the midst of the foe aboard Baroque Grav craft, before launching themselves to revel in the slaughter and yes, literally bathing in the decadent sprays of arterial blood and explosively dismembered corpses littering the path of their passage. For the Dark Eldar, the visual horrors they unleash are just as pleasing as the visibly clean tearing of a razored blade across soft flesh, or for that matter, whatever they choose. They relish casually breaking the bodies of their captives, but such crude and tedious pain only grants them mere momentary slivers of enjoyment. For the Drukhari prize even more highly the cruel crushing of their captive's spirit, for truly nothing is more gratifying to a Dark Eldar than securing utter dominion over one who has resisted them, which, as we talked about interestingly, aligns them very closely with Slaanesh. They will drink in every nuance of woe until their captives are left in a vegetabilized state, barely able to dribble words out of their ruined orifices. Somehow it may be discerned as a request for death. How pitiful, how pathetic, how dare they have the sheer audacity to request such a thing. Except it's likely that even if this wish were granted, it will be yet another form of mental torture. As for many, this will not be the release they were wishing for. They will instead be brought before the foul Dark Eldar homunculi, the guardians of life and death who hold many an individual's fate in their distorted claws. For the many whose minds are already beyond the point of conscious awareness but still able to feel, they will be rent and reshaped into undying trophies or even grotesque items of jewelry, furniture or decoration. Many a homunculized lair features disturbing, moaning, nerve-inducted twitching of things and objects fashioned from the still living remains of their favourite victims. Other unfortunate captives that no longer have any use will be slowly rendered down like so much fat. Their final fate is to become imbibed as some description of an elixir or powerful narcotic destined for the monstrous beings who stole their so precious lives. And all of this is the most narrow snapshot of what takes place within the darkest recesses of Commorragh. Commorragh is central to everything that is Dark Eldar. It was their salvation during the emergence of Slaanesh. It is now their whole world. Komorra is the launch pad for the Jakari. It is their hub city by which they reach out into real space to then drag their unwitting victims back to the darkened corners of hell. It's important to understand that when we talk about the webway being a series of tunnels linking one place to another, it's a common mistake to think of it simply as that corridor or tunnel connecting two places. But the webway is far more than this. The webway, similarly to the warp, appears to ignore dimensional rules and physics. The spaces inside of it can be absolutely vast, large enough to carry entire fleets of ships, indeed entire cities, and who knows, potentially even planetary-sized bodies. It could in theory contain an entire race in complete isolation from the rest of material space and the immaterium. It's tempting to think of the webway as another dimension itself, except that it is not. And that's important to remember, even though to all intents and purposes it does act like another dimension. But the webway is a constructed artificial pseudo-space that exists between the material realm and the warp. This is why it can be accessed from both and linked between these spaces. The other faction who dabble with dimensions are of course the Necron, but Lord knows I do not want to go off on a tangent right now and submit you guys to yet another physics lecture. Many sections of the webway were destroyed during the fall and have further deteriorated in the time since. The wards which once acted as a defense against the dark energy of the warp were broken beyond repair by the fall, and when activity boils over within Komorra, the totality of the psychic signal of the Jakari radiates even more powerfully than usual, thus drawing the entities of the immaterium toward the dark city like apex predators catching the scent of blood in the water. These incursions are referred to by the Jakari as disjunctions, and it should be not underestimated how catastrophic such events are for the inhabitants of Komorra. Hellish warp creatures burst through the gaping cracks of the webway to feast upon the souls of any dark elder they come across. Spires or slums, it makes no difference to the demonic entities, and soon all of Komorra becomes a brutal war for survival. No disjunction, though, has eclipsed the devastating consequences which occurred during the breaching of Cain's Gate. Returning to the webway and the city though, the critical thing to understand is that although the webway is described as a bridge and a series of pathways, it can also open out into these large dimensional spaces that can allow for entire cities like Komorra to exist, and perhaps even bigger. For ordinary mortals to look upon the worlds within the webway, it can be a mind-bending experience, as ordinary laws do not seem to apply here. In fact, it can even seem as if the eye is playing optical tricks and become very difficult to look at for your average pleb mortal. And still, the webway is not what it once was, and now even though they shelter from the storm of the warp, the Jakari are far from safe here, and this only feeds their anxiety and heightened sense of their own precarious situations. Komorra is the dark city which seethes with a constant flow of corruption, as it draws evil to itself only to breathe it back out into the void. Today, it is an endless nest of architectural contradictions and spatial anomalies. Each of its estates has been overdeveloped to such an extent that their growth has been forced into the vertical plane, and the rival regions sprouting upwards like a tangle of needle plants fighting for a scrap of sunlight. Each of these spires and towers is linked to its fellows by hundreds of curved arches and silver structures that glow with stolen energies. Its towering palaces reach both upward and downward, spiraling into the depths of captive space. With each passing year, the parasitic city seeks to devour ever more of the hidden dimension that acts as its host. Some areas of the city are more well known than others, some mapped and some are not. Others are death to enter unbidden. The personal realms of powerful archons or cadaverous homunculi who do not take kindly to unsolicited intrusions, yet most dangers are those regions that have fallen into disuse due to either structural or dimensional collapse. And these may take the form of monster-haunted wastelands of vitreous wreckage and ossified remains, or lakes of seething poisons and screaming shadows. The latter will often have suffered dimensional breaches due to the partial or total collapse of the webway around them, and may be bombarded by the light of dying stars, or exist within fields of entropic radiation that wither living creatures to dust in seconds. But the more desolate areas around and below the great city are known as Low Komorra. These ruins of shattered spires and hidden cabals dot through this darkened wasteland. Here exists
The Force Flex Plus has not one, not three, but two side seams, and it's going to help connect us to a world with less leaks. You're welcome.
Earlier this month, astronomers turned their telescopes on the heart of our galaxy, as they have done for years. Yet tonight would be different. Invisible to any wavelength of light, a monster lurks at the very center of our Milky Way, the single most destructive force in the known universe. Spinning silently in space, a supermassive black hole, over 44 million kilometers in diameter, swallows all matter that strays too close. Known as Sagittarius A, this black hole has a mass of more than 4 million of our suns, and has held our entire galaxy in its tight grip for untold eons. For most of that time, scientists have believed that Sagittarius A has been relatively quiet, with our galaxy carefully spinning in its gravitational embrace, and the innermost stars playing a constant and very dangerous game as they orbited near the terminal limits of its deadly embrace, just out of reach. Earlier this year, however, the monster awoke, and now scientists are scrambling to understand what this means. Working from the European Southern Observatory's Very Large Telescope in Chile and W.M. Keck Observatory in Hawaii, astronomers observed Sagittarius A, probing the secrets of the Leviathan at the heart of our galaxy. Because of thick dust clouds between us and Sagittarius A, though, scientists often observe the black hole in the infrared spectrum, which can cut through most of that dusty haze that blocks out regular light. Now, black holes obviously can't be directly observed due to the fact that their massive gravity sucks in even light itself, so there's no photons left to travel across space and deliver their information to a computer sensor or your eye. What scientists can do, however, is observe their effects on the space around them, especially the effects of their massive gravity. This is how new black holes are very often discovered. Scientists will find a region of space with stars moving at peculiarly fast speeds, and long-term observations will reveal that they seem to be orbiting a patch of empty space. Bingo! You got yourself an invisible monster there, a tear in the fabric of space-time that's completely camouflaged from detection, save for the incredible influence it has on nearby bodies. But not only can scientists detect black holes by watching their effects on clouds of gas, dust, or stars, but they can even calculate how massive the black hole is by calculating the velocity of the objects orbiting around them. This is how scientists were able to discover the monstrous size of Sagittarius A. Sometimes, though, black holes have much more dramatic displays of their terrible power, and earlier this month, Sagittarius A reminded us of its presence in a dramatic way, one that has scientists fearing the implications. Black holes, much the same as stars, can display changes in their output across the electromagnetic spectrum. Stars can brighten and dim over time, or show other changes across the EM spectrum. Black holes can also do the same, and by observing them over the course of years, scientists can measure their variability and develop a good model for each individual celestial body. This year, though, Sagittarius A bucked the trend in pretty major ways. Observing the massive black hole in the infrared spectrum, scientists picked up what they called unprecedented changes in its variability. Twice, Sagittarius A exceeded historical peaks in its output of infrared radiation, with scientists describing the event as eruptions. Having observed the black hole for the last 20 years, astronomers were shocked to discover bursts of infrared radiation stronger than the average variability by a factor of 75. To make matters even more strange, though, over 2 nights this May, huge drops in brightness were observed, both occurring over the course of a few minutes. Something was happening, and if it was affecting a black hole 44 million kilometers in diameter, then this something was big. Really, really big. Just what that something was, though, is something that has left scientists scratching their heads. Some have proposed that these changes in variability could be perfectly normal for Sagittarius A, given the fact that it's existed for an unimaginably long time, and we've only been observing it for the last 2 decades. It very well could be that we simply don't have an accurate model of Sagittarius A's variability yet. Its cycles could stretch far outside of the 20-year observation period we've logged so far. Others, however, point to a possible change in the accretion state of this supermassive black hole as cause for the unexplained flashes of infrared light and subsequent dimming. In layman's terms, this means that Sagittarius A could have just had a lunch, and we were lucky enough to observe it. Only this would have to be a very, very big lunch. Despite popular opinion, black holes don't constantly suck in all material in the universe like some sort of galactic drain. If this were true, then our universe would have been emptied of all matter billions of years ago. Black holes do have massive gravity, and typically this gravity is so powerful that as they form, they pull in all local material, and, well, to be honest, we're not exactly sure what happens to the material inside a black hole because mathematics turns to gibberish at the heart of these monsters. But destroy it is definitely a pretty safe assumption. However, just like any object with mass, the extent of their gravity is wholly dependent on their mass. So every black hole has a limit on just how far its ability to pull in material extends, and after initially clearing everything in its orbit, or caught within its own gravitational pull, black holes tend to quiet down and just sort of sit there, doing not much of anything. That's because any matter that's survived around it is all matter that's now safely orbiting the monster outside of its event horizon, in exactly the same way that we orbit our giant sun without actually plunging into it. Our sun loves us. It loves us so much that it wants nothing more than to give us a giant hug. It tries to do this by exerting an attractive force on the Earth, constantly pulling it down toward it, where it can obliterate us in a fatal fiery embrace. However, like someone caught in a relationship with an overly clinging individual, the Earth exerts sideways momentum that's perpendicular to our direction toward the sun. Our sideways momentum is fast enough that as we fall toward the sun, we manage to miss it and zip by its side instead, only for the sun to pull us back toward itself and our sideways speed once more making us sidestep it. This, in essence, is all it means to orbit an object. You maintain a large enough sideways velocity to constantly miss falling directly into the object pulling you down. When Sagittarius A first formed, it swallowed up all material orbiting it that lacked sufficient momentum to sidestep its fatal attractive force. Billions of years later, though, the center of the galaxy has been pretty sufficiently cleared of material, leaving behind an accretion disk where friction and collisions between particles gradually but very slowly continues to feed material into the black hole. Some scientists suspect, though, that this year, something big, really big, managed to stray into Sagittarius A's gravitational pull. This could have been a rogue gas galaxy by the gravitational effect of other stars around it, until eventually it intersected paths with Sagittarius A. Or it could have been a huge cloud of dust and gas, whose slowly decaying orbit around Sagittarius A finally led it to the maw of the beast itself. Either of these two occurrences would by now be pretty rare events given Sagittarius A's age and the fact that it should have swallowed up most things not in a stable orbit around it, and we would have been very fortunate to be looking in the right direction in time to spot this rare galactic event. However, a third, terrifying possibility may be that Sagittarius A is actually growing by some unknown mechanism, and as it grows, so does its gravitational force, pulling in material and stars once safe from its grasp. Scientists do not think this is likely, but if it were true, then we may be witnessing the awakening of a galactic behemoth, and maybe one day soon, the Earth will be on the menu. What do you think the strange bright flashes of radiation were? Are we all going to die horrible deaths as we're swallowed up into a black hole? Why didn't we mention aliens once for a change in this entire episode? Let us know in the comments. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more great content.
From top to reinforced bottom, GLAD has maximized every square nanometer for optimal storage. Photos, documents, pizza crust. That's some epic storage capacity.
Tonight, I'll be eating roasted cauliflower tacos with spicy chipotle sauce. Thank you. Oh! I wasn't ready!
You want cheese to go with that wine?
Our universe began in a state of ultimate heat and compression in what we call the Big Bang, and it'll end by expanding forever towards a state of perfect cold and emptiness. It's incredible that we could figure this much out, but we should not get too cocky. Big questions remain open, like what happened before the Big Bang? What, if anything, happens after our universe? I'm about to give you the most outrageous hypothesis so far that may actually be right. Conformal cyclic cosmology is a story of the origin and the end of our universe from the great mathematical physicist Sir Roger Penrose. It goes like this. The infinitely far future, when the universe has expanded exponentially to an unthinkably large size, and every black hole and particle has decayed into faint radiation. That infinite stretch of space and time is identically the same thing as the infinitesimal and instantaneous Big Bang of a new universe. And our universe is just one in an endless chain. We know this is an outrageous proposal because Roger Penrose himself called it that. And as with all outrageous proposals, it's probably wrong. But if there's a faint chance that it's right, it's so bizarre that we should definitely know about it. Okay, so conformal cyclic cosmology, CCC. Here, conformal is for the conformal scaling needed to turn your gigantic end of the universe into a tiny new Big Bang. A conformal transformation is just some mathematical function that you apply to a geometric space which preserves all of the angles in that space. An example would be if you had a sheet of rubber and drew some lines on it, then expanded the rubber evenly in all directions. The lines would get longer and further apart, but the angles at their intersections would stay the same. This is perhaps the simplest conformal transformation, just multiplying or dividing all dimensions by the same scaling factor. We would say that our universe has conformal invariance under scale changes, so the angles don't change if you change the size smoothly. But other things sure do change. It makes a big difference whether every atom in the universe is right next to each other or a billion light years apart. But let me try to give you a sense of a situation where scale might not matter. A conformal scaling of space-time means scaling both space and time. For example, consider a universe that's 1 light second across, and it exists for the span of a single second. Light has time to travel across it once. Scale it up by around 30 quintillion times to describe a second universe that's 1 billion light years across and lasts 1 billion years. Again, light crosses it once in that time. Let's say these universes contain no matter, only photons, light. They both contain the same number of light rays which begin travelling in the same direction, although obviously they're packed much more closely together in the smaller universe. Over the life of both universes, those rays trace out the same pattern. All the angles between them stay the same, and the rays pass close to each other the same number of times. Now, these clearly aren't the same thing. Light takes 30 quintillion times longer to cross one than the other. But who's to say that? Remember, the universes contain only light, no observers and no clocks. And there's the key point. Light does not experience the flow of time. For those photons, the beginning of their journey is the same as the end, and these universes are equivalent. So there's a crude notion of how a tiny early universe could be equivalent to a gigantic late universe. It was pretty loose compared to the formal explanation of conformal cyclic cosmology, more street cyclic cosmology. But let's get a bit more rigorous. We'll go to business casual cyclic cosmology. The sizes of 2 chunks of space-time, we need to grid them up with rulers and clocks. Surely then the big universe will have more length than time ticks.
The RPG mobile hit of 2019, now cross-platform on PC. Same great gameplay, all new animations and textures. Turn-based battle collection for serious RPG fans. A massive online community. Play better, play faster, play everywhere. Raid Shadow Legends, now on desktop.
Your care and compassion are timeless, and you've always wanted to care for people. You want to make their lives better. With GCU's accelerated nursing program, in as little as 16 months, you'll learn innovative hands-on techniques with real-world clinical experiences, blended with online coursework to prepare you for the front line of nursing in the 21st century. Become the nurse every patient deserves. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Private, Christian, affordable. Search GCU ABSN today.
On the morning of the 8th of May 1965, a man by the name of Carl Robert Dish, working at Byrd Station in Antarctica, mysteriously disappeared. Search parties were hastily assembled, but could find no trace of him, except for a single set of footprints in the snow. Cold, vast and desolately beautiful, Antarctica kind that nature does indeed conquer all, for she is far too formidable a force in this part of the world for humans to contend with. It is the only significant landmass on Earth that harbours no permanent inhabitants, and remarkably, one that remained unexplored until little over 100 years ago. Given the brutal conditions there, it is not difficult to understand why. It is the coldest, windiest, and bizarrely, the driest continent on the planet. Despite the fact that Antarctica is almost perpetually covered in snow, it receives very little rain or snowfall, and is in fact classed as a desert. The snow that does exist there has built up over hundreds of years, as it is far too cold to ever melt. For this reason, Antarctica has claimed dozens of lives, and devastated many more. Those who have visited this strange region often have polarizing views regarding its allure. Some appreciate the isolation, others are driven mad by it. One's existence there seems to fluctuate between endless and sometimes insufferable silence and the deafening sounds of colliding icebergs and howling blizzards. Save for some stunning mountain ranges and glaciers, the landscape is often featureless. No trees or permanent wildlife exists in this part of the world, resulting in vast expanses of brilliant white snow. It is no wonder that Antarctica is perceived as either a place of serene calm and beauty, or a harsh and remote cabin fever-inducing nightmare. Over the past century, many dark tales have emerged from this unique continent, from infamous disappearances, murders, and even the frenzied killing of pets, to stories regarding pyramids under the ice, and the possibility of ancient cities buried beneath the permafrost. It is a place of miseries it seems unwilling to surrender. One such haunting tale, which has endured for more than 50 years, occurred on a cold, dark morning back in 1965. A year previous to this, 26-year-old Carl Robert Dish, a young man from Monroe, Wisconsin, had joined the staff at Boulder Laboratories, working as an ionospheric physicist. As part of his role, he was asked to join a research team in Antarctica, a daunting prospect to say the least, but he agreed, and soon found himself assigned to Byrd Station, situated almost 600 miles from the geographic South Pole. Over the next 6 months, he would spend most of his time working in the Central Radio Propagation Laboratory, and his job required him to work long hours at the Radio Noise Building, a small hut strategically positioned just over a mile northwest of the main complex. Despite the distance, the two buildings were connected by a hand line, a length of rope which helped guide the researchers during harsh weather or when visibility was poor. Dish himself had made this journey dozens of times, so was familiar with the terrain and the navigational processes involved. However, on the morning of the 8th of May 1965, he would set out from the Radio Noise Building for the very last time, and walk never to be seen again. Dish left the small hut at 9:15 AM during nautical twilight, heading for the main complex. The winds were up, but he was fully attired in Antarctic clothing, which in theory would have provided adequate protection from the freezing cold temperatures, which had dropped as low as -44 degrees Fahrenheit. The trek should have taken him no longer than half an hour. Nevertheless, when Dish had still not reached his destination by 10 AM, his colleagues became sufficiently concerned to assemble a vehicle search party and deploy it along his intended route. They found no sign of him, however. Further investigation revealed a set of footprints over by the Radio Noise Building. These were discovered at 11:30 and began at the bottom of the ladder attached to the hut, but rather than leading south along the hand line, as they would have expected, they headed west towards the skiway, a landing area where supplies were flown in. Colleagues followed his trail downwind for a distance of approximately 4 miles, towards the southwest corner of the station's outer perimeter, at which point the search party needed to return to base to refuel. At the time, his co-workers noted how his tracks appeared purposeful, with consistent long paces, as opposed to an uncertain stop-start kind of progression. This suggested that wherever Dish was heading, he was moving with intent, as opposed to the apprehension one might expect if lost or confused.
Kinder Bueno. Wow. It's crispy. It's creamy. It's not your average chocolate bar. Smooth milk chocolate, crispy wafer, and creamy hazelnut filling. It's Kinder Bueno.
Once the vehicles had been refueled, the team moved back out to the corner of the skiway. Unfortunately, a 3-hour search of the area yielded nothing, as by this time, the heavy gales had blown snow over the rest of the tracks, causing them to disappear. Not only this, but the blustering 30-knot winds had also covered the tracks of the search party, making a safe return extremely difficult. They eventually made it back to base at 6:15 p.m. that evening, and by 7 p.m, an extensive search of the supply line, the emergency Jamesway and fuel dump was undertaken, all to no avail. An hour or so later, his colleagues formed a human chain in order to search the route leading from the base, all the way down to the skiway where his tracks had disappeared. Despite difficult weather conditions and limited visibility, floodlights were lit over the station and flares were launched every 30 minutes, until a point when visibility became so poor that these measures were deemed ineffective. The following day, a third vehicle search party was assembled, and this covered the 1 mile wide by 9 mile long area leading from the base to the skiway and beyond. Despite finding occasional unblemished tracks moving in a southwesterly direction, they once again abruptly disappeared approximately 4 miles southwest of the radio noise building. On the 10th of May, 2 days after the disappearance, an extensive search began at 7:40 a.m. This consisted of an 8-man party, 2 vehicles, a Jamesway, provisions and fuel. The search began at the main complex, moving in a southerly direction and making perpendicular sweeps to the east and west. The search party marked their progress with flags and continued for 12 miles beyond the perimeter of the station, but nothing was found. On the 12th, the northeast and southeast sectors of Bird Station were searched. The weather was favourable, but darkness severely hampered their visual range. Over the next 2 days, visibility worsened to the point that no search was possible. By the 14th, 35 square miles of area had been covered, but despite this extensive search, Carl Robert Dish was never seen again. In the following weeks, on account of the time he had been missing, combined with the brutal weather conditions he would have been exposed to, he was presumed dead. A memorial service was held by friends and family back in his hometown of Monroe, and another by his colleagues at Bird, marking the beginning of a mystery which for well over 50 years has tragically endured without a sense of closure, as it's not so easy to explain. The questions that were asked back then are still being asked today. Why did Dish deviate from his usual route? Was it a mistake on his part, or was it intentional? And how did a physically fit, experienced and intelligent individual seem to vanish without trace? A number of theories have evolved over time in an attempt to explain what might have happened, some reasonably straightforward, and others requiring more of an open mind. But one thing all these supposed explanations have in common is that not one of them is without its flaws. Perhaps the most popular theory regarding Dish's disappearance is the previously mentioned weather conditions. It is conceivable that when he left the radio noise building, a combination of the blizzard, poor visibility and the monotonous white landscape caused him to lose his sense of direction and wander off to the west instead of south towards the main complex. Once he had ventured a short distance, it would have been very difficult to regain his bearings. However, Dish had made this short journey more than 24 times before. Given his experience, it is unlikely that he would miss the handline and deviate so far off his route. After descending the ladder attached to the radio noise building, the rope would have been right there in front of him. Even despite the low visibility, there is no way he could have missed it. Furthermore, if he had simply lost his way, why would he have continued to walk in a straight line for at least 4 miles? Why would his tracks not have indicated a more uncertain behaviour? And could he not have used those tracks to retrace his steps back to the radio noise building? After all, if the footprints were still visible when the search party found them, he certainly should have been able to see them and follow them. This begs the question then, was his straying off the beaten track intentional? An alternate explanation to Dish's disappearance suggests that he might have suffered a mental breakdown. It is rumoured that he had been mistreated or even cheated during a card game just moments before he left. He apparently threw his cards down onto the table and told his colleague that he was going to visit his friends at the pole. A similar anecdote references the fact that Dish was part of a 2-man team and that his co-worker was an incredibly boring individual whose monotonous voice could have driven a man insane over a long enough period of time. Considering how tedious certain shifts might be in this line of work, it is not hard to imagine the situation being compounded by spending days on end with someone you find insufferably dull. It is considered that, much like the example of the aforementioned card game, Dish had simply had enough, left the building and walked away to clear his head. But surely a man of his experience would have known that pursuing such an action would have been suicide considering the hostile environment, unless things had really gotten out of hand and he set off that morning with no intention of returning. But then why suicide? Whilst it is understandable that trivial issues might get blown out of proportion in such isolated conditions, it is difficult to understand why someone like Dish would react in this way. He was a successful young man with his whole life ahead of him after all. In either case, the lack of a body is problematic, as you would expect to find at least something if either scenario was true, unless of course he fell into a deep crevice, which is entirely possible, given that they are a common feature across the Antarctic landscape, but perhaps there could be other reasons for this. Unsurprisingly, theories have also been put forward which suggest a supernatural element. Researchers have long contested the fact that the footprints seem to come to an abrupt stop in the middle of nowhere. Those sceptical of such notions attest that further footprints had been covered over with fresh snow, whilst those more inclined to look for otherworldly explanations argue that the tracks just stopped, as though Dish had simply vanished or was lifted into the air. Whilst the former is more plausible, it was allegedly reported by several people involved in the search that unusual lights and noises were seen and heard in the vicinity, both before and after Dish's disappearance, though the source of this activity was never determined. Was he distracted as he exited the radio noise building, and did he follow someone or something that might have caught his attention? Perhaps he saw these unusual lights over the skiway and thought he was looking at an unscheduled supply drop. If this was the case, however, an unscheduled supply drop would have been a big deal, and he surely would have reported this activity before setting off. Furthermore, we could not find any official source regarding reports of this strange phenomena, which leads us to believe these details could be embellishments that have been added over time. Another unusual element to this story is that Gus, Dish's husky, went missing a few days later. It is theorized that he went looking for his master, but this small detail would later become linked to one of the more bizarre explanations surrounding this case. It is claimed that in 1971, a message arrived at a research centre in the Antarctic via the AA2 weather circuit. The author claimed to be none other than Carl Robert Dish, and the communication read, "To the world I am dead. They believe that my body is but a pinpoint, frozen here to the surface of this white continent. I say to you, I, Carl Dish, live. Do not for one moment think that it was a mistake. Everything was planned. They pushed me, tormented me, and bored me with their shallow lives. He went on to say that he had enticed his dog away by using tinned oysters soaked in barbecue sauce, and talked about the intense loneliness he now felt. The endless singing of the wind almost drives me mad. I begin to long for human companionship. Whilst this is intriguing to say the least, it would be almost impossible for anyone to survive so long in such brutal conditions, especially being as poorly equipped as he had been. As a result, it is generally accepted that this message was a hoax. One final
Is someone trying to steal your Butterfinger? Call the BFI. Whoa.
I'm going in.
No one has a finger on your Butterfinger.
Each of us has a purpose. We are destined to do something meaningful, not only to support our loved ones, but to positively impact our communities throughout the country. What do you think a private Christian education looks like? Grand Canyon University graduates 25,000 students yearly and offers more than 225 high-quality programs across 9 colleges. Find your purpose at GCU. Visit GCU.edu.
is that Dish may have defected to the Soviet Union, or at least may have been abducted by them. As far-fetched as this may sound, there is in fact a story regarding a British Royal Navy commander attached to a survey group in Antarctica who disappeared in very similar circumstances during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. It turned out that this man had secretly been working for the Soviets and that they picked him up just before his cover was about to be blown. Dish did go missing during the height of the Cold War after all, and as a specialist in his field, he would have been a valuable and therefore attractive asset to either side. This could also explain the strange lights and weird noises, if indeed those things did occur. The problem with this theory, however, is the locality of Bird Station. It was roughly 400 miles from the nearest coastline, and that is a massive distance to cover during an Antarctic winter. So unless his rescuers, or abductors, had a secret base nearby, this explanation is also unlikely. Despite the assortment of theories, it seems that not one of them is sufficiently watertight to draw a definite conclusion. What makes this case so intriguing is the contrast between the minimal amount of information available on the disappearance and the vast range of possible explanations put forward, despite none of those explanations standing up to intense scrutiny. Given the evidence, it seems most likely that Carl Robert Dish knowingly committed suicide. A combination of the secluded conditions, dealing with the same individuals day in, day out, the unbearable weather and depressing lack of daylight, may have all conspired together to push this young man over the edge. Antarctica is a strange place, which does strange things to people, and he would not be the first, and certainly not the last person to succumb to its dark gravitas. And even though his colleagues reported that he seemed fine within himself, the unfortunate truth is that some individuals are just too good at hiding how they really feel. Of course, we cannot say that this is what happened with any certainty. The more time that passes, the more the details seem to fade, not unlike a certain set of footprints. Perhaps there is something poetic in that. This beautifully desolate continent certainly has a way of keeping its secrets. May Carl Robert Dish be at peace, wherever he is.
This video is brought to you by Squarespace, where
The RP.
Introducing Broyhill at Big Lots. Because sofas get jumped on. Patio sets get dumped on, rugs get rolled on, and strolled on. So live on. Broyhill, built for reality.
On average, in the United States, the number of active missing person cases ranges from 80,000 to 90,000 at any given time. Of that number, about 50. Oh, hey, you're back. That was kind of quick. Didn't expect you to turn up again so soon. I'm not complaining, you just caught me off guard. I didn't really have anything lined up for another, I don't know, week or so, but let me look around. I might have something for you. Let's see, when was the last time we had some kind of haunted paranormal vlogger thing? Man versus unspeakable horror, along with a camera, that sort of jazz. It's been a while since we've had some of that, right? Oh, hey! Okay, here's one. I remember writing this sticky note for myself too. Try post content. That was back in March, maybe? Let's see what we've got here. Oh, recent uploads. Over 20 videos. Yeah, it seems like we might have something here. I held off on it back when I wrote this note and took a look because it's, well...
What do you think you're doing? Let's face it, your life is miserable. You won't admit it, but you're doing this to yourself. Why do you insist on keeping everything so dark in here? That's not helping your mental situation. But it hurts, doesn't it? You've actually managed to convince yourself that living in these conditions is somehow favorable. My God, your room is a mess. Do you really think you can help anyone before giving this place a good scrubbing? Here's a thought. Maybe your precious audience could help you.
Yeah, so it was a late night. This was kind of weird even for me, and it's like, I was tired. But look, now we get to check this out together and see what's up with the body bag doing the worm. Okay, so... Post Content is a channel that arrived on December 23rd, 2018, with an upload that was just about a minute and a half long, setting a precedent for the channel. Most of the episodes are very short, giving us bite-sized views on the life of a man who has a very serious paranormal house guest issue. As he moves around the room, we see he might also have a carpet stain issue, suggested by the plastic draped all over the floor. Next to his desk, we can also spot a bucket with some red residue, which I'm sure we'll find is a completely innocent inclusion for the bedroom. Our new friend turns off the gentle music on his laptop and investigates the hallway again.
Nope.
The next video, posted on Christmas 2018, has a peculiar title, Easy Go Solutions 2018 1080p Web Rip. The video description gives us a bit of context. I couldn't find this EGS promo anywhere on YouTube, so as a Christmas gift from me to you, I thought I'd just upload it myself. This message really speaks to me.
Everyone knows how it is to feel undesirable, and many fail to realize the simple solution. Yesterday's bad energy is history, so move past it. See? It's behind you now, so keep moving. And if you feel yourself slipping, just remember, life is an ice cream. Enjoy it before it melts.
That last statement, life is an ice cream, can be seen in a sticky note attached to the computer at the end of the first video. It seems our friend really enjoys Easy Go Solutions. Next up, we have 3 videos that can be considered a sort of trilogy: Vlog, Encounter Tutorial, and Encounter Update. Let's follow the uploader as he records a new house guest for us to meet and how to deal with them.
Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm doing a video essay on this is a vlog, which means you will listen to what I have to say. So smash that bell, ring the bell icon, and remember to you've experienced it before, right? It's dark, you turn around, and there he is. Luckily, I've decided to make a quick tutorial on how to deal with this yourself, so that you'll feel prepared when it inevitably happens again. Also, whoever's messaging me, if you're watching this, please stop it. I don't need this negative energy in my life. Anyway, you've seen a horror film, right? Basically, all you want to do is turn around and then back again. I mean, once you figure out the trick, really, it stops being so spooky. Remember to ring the bell, share it, like, comment, So, I bet some of you are wondering what even happened in the previous video, and that's why I'm here just a few hours later, I think, to give a more in-depth explanation. It appears I was assaulted by an unknown individual. I kinda got pushed down and I tried to kick him, and I think I got him pretty good, yeah. And as you can see, I'm just fine, feeling good. I don't know, maybe it was just some guy who tried to rob me or something. I guess that happens. Well, I hope you're looking forward to my next tutorial. I really feel like this series is gonna take off. Jehovah's Witness?
In the next video, Constraint Tutorial, we come across yet another specter, this time lurking in the window.
You know, your first instinct might be to look away. I know that was my instinct, but this is something you really don't want to do, and I'll quickly demonstrate why. See? It's closer. Luckily, we just need to keep our eyes fixed, and oh yeah, my mother is somehow convinced that with enough confidence all this will simply go away. So let's try just asking nicely, you never know. Excuse me, but could you please leave? What do you know? Didn't work. Huh. Well, you might also want to try and turn your head and look right at it, but I don't really feel like taking the provocative path here. So, you know what? You tell me how that works out for you. Just gotta keep looking. And there we go. I think I'll try and catch some sleep. Have a good night. Yesterday's bad energy is history. So move past it. See? It's behind you now. It's behind you now. It's behind
finally, another tutorial. Got a bit queasy at the end there, but otherwise it turned out pretty good. Not sure which one of us needs to get out more, me or that thing, am I right? We've got a few interesting bits of trivia from this video. First, a potential use for the bucket has been demonstrated, and from what we've seen of its insides, we might have to assume it's blood that's being thrown off. Second, those Easy Go Solutions videos might not be as kind as the uploader believes, since the video he took for us has come back to mock him. And third, the uploader is in contact with his mother, aware of his issues, or the fact that he's having issues anyhow, and has given some advice. Mix mom's advice with a consistent need for calming videos, and we start to see a picture of somebody who doesn't have the best mental or emotional state. That's natural for the situation, but it is worth noting. The next video, House Tour, does more to show us oddities in passing.
So, this is my room, my bed, my bucket, because I get a bit sick sometimes. Oh, and this is where I keep various types of rope. If we go outside, we have the hallway, a couple other doors I try not to touch, and the bathroom. Huh. Must be occupied. Now, I don't usually go downstairs unless it's absolutely necessary, but for the sake of my official YouTube house tour, I thought I'd make an exception. And here we are. Here we are. Huh. Doesn't seem that bad, actually. Thanks, YouTube, for helping me make this step.
He seemed rather proud of that collection of ropes in the room, didn't he? Weird. Almost as weird as the notification on his phone beckoning him, but without lighting up the screen. He ignores it very purposely after considering the phone, then takes us over to the bathroom, which definitely seems to be occupied by something. The rest of the house is revealed to be in a good condition, and whoever set up all this furniture wants to keep it that way, judging by all the plastic coverings. The next upload, Indifference Tutorial, has an audio track, but we have to communicate with our new friend through subtitles. Tonight's theme is Indifference toward the things behind you. We are going to be playing a game where we wait. Morning equals victory. Victory equals staying awake. There's plenty of awful squishing noises in the background as the video plays, but playing up to the reveal of what exactly we're looking at.
We know getting on track is never an easy task. That's why Optimum Nutrition Gold Standard.
A world of warriors. Hundreds of champions. Thousands of legends. amongst the chosen.
Raid Shadow Legends. Download it now on Plarium Play.
Welcome. My name is Laura Roughton, and in this compilation video, I will showcase some of my favorite paranormal cases that we explored on The Paranormal Scholar in 2019. I invite you to sit back and enjoy. There is something about mirrors that attracts the mind to the paranormal. This notion perhaps extends from an innate incomprehension of how the world can be seen so clearly and exact upon something so flat and two-dimensional. It may be that some primal part of our brain searches for some small mark of difference to distinguish our comfortable three-dimensional reality from that of the two-dimensional mirror. Creators of horror movies and fiction play on the complexity of the mirror all the time, a classic trope being the catching sight of the evil being in the mirror before it strikes in real life. The implication is that there is a sinister aspect to the copycat dimension of the mirror that we casually look at every day. The connection between a sinister other world and mirrors has been around since mirrors were first used millennia ago. One traditional ritual game involved young women walking up a flight of stairs backwards in the dark, save for the candle they were carrying. When the girl reached the mirror upstairs, the rules of the ritual game instructed her to gaze into it. Supposedly, a face would appear, the face of her future husband. However, for some unfortunate girls, they would instead catch sight of a skull or the Grim Reaper. If this happened, then it was said that the church bells would ring out for her funeral rather than a wedding. This practice has evolved over time into the ritual game we know today as Bloody Mary. Whether alone or in a group of people, it is said that Bloody Mary appears to those who chant her name 3 or 13 times into a mirror. She is said to take on many forms according to those who have claimed to see her. Sometimes she is covered in blood, sometimes she is a corpse. On other occasions, a witch or a ghost. Occasionally, Bloody Mary is even benevolent, but those stories are rarer. Usually, she is depicted as evil, a being known to scream at the ritual's participants, curse them, steal their souls, or even cause them physical harm. Whilst this may seem like a sensational urban legend, there is a measure of truth in it. In fact, you do not need to chant anything to start seeing manifestations in mirrors. One paranormal practice merely requires an ordinary mirror, a dim light, and a patient participant to gaze into the mirror. One of the more common sights is seeing one's facial features become distorted and even seem like they are melting. In more extreme reports, people have claimed to have seen animals, strange faces, and even ghosts. Giovanni Caputo of the University of Urbino in Italy has stated that this phenomenon occurs due to an inexplicable misfiring of the brain's facial recognition system. Others say that the visions that occur are due to a form of self-hypnosis. In the 1990s, the psychologist and philosopher Dr. Raymond Moody popularized the use of mirrors when he discussed the concept of a psychomantium. A psychomantium is a small enclosed area set up with a comfortable chair, dim lighting, and a mirror angled so as not to reflect anything but darkness. The experiencer then sits in the chair and stares into the darkness. It is said that using a psychomantium may enable communication with the dead. Dr. Moody has expressed that such exercises have helped people manage their grief. After all, there are many reports from people who have used the psychomantium claiming that their dead loved ones have come back to speak to them and give comfort. Yet, not all uses of mirror magic are described as ending so positively, whether it be the appearance of Bloody Mary or a dark shadow reflected in the mirror for only a split second. The sinister consequences of using mirrors in paranormal rituals are simply too heavy for many to justify using them. Sir Winston Churchill was one of the most remarkable men of the 20th century. He filled many roles in his life: a war correspondent who took part in a cavalry charge, a Boer POW who escaped captivity and lived as a fugitive in South Africa, Britain's first Lord of the Admiralty in the Great War, and later, and most memorably, the heroic Prime Minister who led Great Britain through its finest hour in the 1940s. Churchill was in his 60s when he led his nation against the most terrible war machine ever conceived by mankind. Yet, there was one person who had predicted this with incredible precision: Churchill himself, at the age of 16. It was a summer's evening in 1891, and 16-year-old Churchill and Maryland Evans, a classmate, were talking together in a basement room of their headmaster's house at Harrow School. The young men's conversation turned towards the future. According to Evans, who recalled their conversation in his diary, Churchill stated that he had a wonderful idea of where I shall be eventually. I have dreams about it, he said. I see into the future. When asked about his dreams by Evans, young Churchill said that he could see vast changes coming over a now peaceful world. Great upheavals, terrible struggles, wars such as one cannot imagine. As shocking as this statement may seem, 16-year-old Churchill claimed to have seen more. He told Evans that he knew that London will be in danger. London will be attacked, and I shall be very prominent in the defence of London. At the time, Evans' response was one of disbelief. With the dreadful days of the Napoleonic Wars now long ago, he regarded Great Britain as forever safe from invasion. To this comment, Churchill supposedly scoffed, explaining that he could see further ahead than Evans. He restated his belief that their country will be subjected somehow to a tremendous invasion. By what means, I do not know. But I tell you, I shall be in command of the defences of London, and I shall save London and England from disaster. During the conflict of the 1940s, hundreds of thousands of bombs were dropped on Britain, with London experiencing 85 major raids by the time the war ended. Certainly, if ever the capital had faced disaster, it was when Churchill was leading the city's defences. Did Churchill's 1891 dreams reveal where he would be in 1940? Far from being a foreseeable path, his future career was hardly predictable. Churchill had multiple near-death experiences, was disgraced during the Great War, and later politically marginalized. Even when the time came in 1940, it was almost a miracle that he was chosen to lead his country over his rival Lord Halifax, whom many preferred for his conciliatory approach. The circumstances had to be precise for Churchill to have become Prime Minister in those tumultuous times. So how do we explain his supposed foresight? It could, of course, have simply been a great boast from an egocentric teenager. Yet, at the time, Britain was at the apex of its power. Queen Victoria, Empress of India and Grandmother of Europe, sat at the head of an empire that controlled nearly 1/4 of the world's population. It was almost unimaginable that London, the heart of that empire, would be in danger. If one were to boast, it would make more sense to speak of conquering the rest of the world and finish colouring the globe red for Britain. Churchill did not, however. Rather, he specified London and England, the centre of the most powerful global empire there had ever been, as being one day in his lifetime on the brink of disaster, and that he would lead its defences. Did Sir Winston Churchill really dream of the future at the age of 16? The following footage footage was shared by the British Earth and Aerial Mystery Society after being filmed by Craig Megson in early February 2018. The video appears to show a formation of unidentified flying objects across the night sky. Megson was changing trains at Preston train station in Lancashire, England, on his way home after a day out with his 6-year-old son. According to his testimony, it was around 6:30 in the evening when he noticed a series of lights in the sky. At first he thought the objects were planes, yet with no flashing lights or sound, he soon dismissed his initial assumption. Then, when more lights appeared, also moving in silent, steady formation, he knew he was witnessing something extraordinary. The peculiar objects quickly drew a crowd of at least 20 people, all with their eyes turned to the sky. Like Megson, they could not explain what they were seeing. In his own words, "I asked the man next to me what he thought they could be, and he simply said, 'They're not planes, mate, that's for sure.'" One explanation that has been proposed is that the mysterious lights were simply Chinese lanterns. However, Megson has stated that the weather conditions that evening were windy. It is highly unlikely that a group of paper lanterns could have moved in such a steady, evenly spaced formation under such windy conditions. Not only that, Chinese lanterns are highly regulated in the United Kingdom. Local authorities must be notified, and lanterns are not permitted in wind speeds of 5 miles per hour or higher. For Craig Megson, the footage is compelling proof that we are not alone in the universe, validating his belief that UFOs of alien origin have been spotted in the skies above his home county of Lancashire for decades. Whilst it is impossible to conclude that these objects are extraterrestrial, they are unidentified. Air Marshal Sir Victor Goddard was a senior commander in the British Royal Air Force in the 1940s. What would be remembered as a distinguished military career began some years earlier in the 1920s, when he read engineering at the University of Cambridge. From there, Goddard became an instructor to the university's air squadron, and later served as a commander for a bomber squadron. In 1935, he was appointed Deputy Director of Intelligence at the Air Ministry. It was at this point that Goddard experienced something that would both haunt and fascinate him for the rest of his life. In his 1975 book, Flight Towards Reality, Goddard recalls a flight he made in 1935 to Edinburgh, Scotland, from Andover, England. As he approached Edinburgh, his plane passed over a dilapidated airfield in Drem, Scotland. From Goddard's observations, the base had clearly been abandoned for some time. Vegetation had overtaken most of the area, and cattle from a nearby farm had moved in. Thinking nothing more of it, Goddard continued his flight until he reached Edinburgh. A few days later, Goddard was due to return to Andover. Following the same flight path as before, he headed in the direction of Drem. However, before he reached the airfield, he flew into bad weather. Goddard described the storm as strange. Along with strong winds and torrential rain, the storm clouds were yellow. Disoriented and quickly losing control of his plane, the experienced pilot climbed the clouds, hoping to burst through into the clear sky. However, they appeared to have no end. It was at this moment that the storm clouds finally broke beneath him, and Goddard was able to see the ground again. Ahead of him was Drem Airfield. Relieved to see a familiar sight, he left the storm behind him and flew into sun and clear skies. Yet, as Goddard got closer, he realized that the Drem airfield was not so familiar after all. In fact, it was completely different. Far from being reclaimed by the surrounding nature, the Drem airfield was alive with activity. Not only was it no longer abandoned, it looked pristine. Mechanics were bustling on the ground below, and 4 planes, each painted bright yellow, sat on the runway. Most strange, however, was how Goddard was unable to identify one of the planes. It was a monoplane, unlike any that the Royal Air Force used. In addition to the strangeness of the yellow planes, Goddard was also surprised to see the mechanics dressed in blue overalls. To his knowledge, all RAF mechanics wore brown. Having little time to digest what he was seeing, Goddard passed over the airfield of Drem and flew back into the storm. The clear skies and bright sun were replaced by the same torrential rain and yellow clouds as before. Once again, he struggled to keep control of his aircraft. Eventually, he was able to wrestle free of the tempest and make it back safely to Andover. When he told his friends what he had seen during his flight, he was greeted with skepticism. The airfield at Drem had, after all, been vacated in 1919, and from 1933 had only seen occasional use from visiting squadrons. There was no possibility of there being an active squadron with planes and mechanics at the airfield when Goddard made his flight in 1935. 4 years after Goddard's peculiar experience in 1939, the overgrown airstrip at Drem was resurfaced, and the whole airfield transformed and reactivated, becoming home to the No. 13 Flying Training School. Not only that, the RAF began to paint their training planes yellow, and a new monoplane, the Miles M14 Magister, joined the roster. By that year, even the mechanics' overalls had been updated to blue instead of brown. Goddard's vision had become a reality. After that, Sir Victor Goddard developed a fascination with paranormal phenomena. He was certain that he had visited the future during his flight in 1935. Olaus Magnus was a 16th century Catholic ecclesiast and writer. He was known as a man with a great sense of scientific scrutiny, having created the most accurate map of the Baltic northern regions of the time. However, after the success of the religious reformation in Sweden, Magnus was forced to flee, exiled to Poland, and eventually to Italy. There he wrote and in 1555 published his most famous work, the title of which translates into English as a description of the northern peoples. In his text, Magnus details a general phenomenon that occurred in the Baltic regions of northern Europe. As he described it, the inhabitants suffer considerably from the rapacity of wolves throughout the year. However, these numerous and aggressive wolf attacks were not regarded as such a serious matter, for there was something far more destructive and dangerous that northern Europeans had to endure. According to Magnus, far worse than natural wolves were men turned into wolves. Supposedly, it was around Christmas time that a multitude of wolves, transformed from men, gathered together, and then spread to rage with wondrous ferocity against human beings. Far from being at the mercy of ordinary wolves, the ecclesiast stated that villagers could tell the difference between wolfmen and true and natural wolves. The werewolf's behavior was easily identifiable. According to the text, when a human habitation has been detected by them isolated in the woods, they besiege it with atrocity. They devour all the human beings and every animal which is found within. Magnus wrote how werewolves supposedly congregated at a ruined castle in the thousands, assaulting the fortification by jumping over the walls. He also related the story of a nobleman who supposedly had in his retinue a peasant with the ability to turn into a wolf. Magnus's writings are often dismissed as a series of unsubstantiated accounts based on local superstition. When speaking about his observations, it is more preferable for academics to focus on what they are certain he was correct about, such as his geographical observations. Werewolves, they conclude, couldn't possibly be a reality. And indeed, it could be said that Magnus's descriptions of werewolves gathering together and attacking villages were superstitious rationalizations for bandit attacks during the Christmas period. After all, around Christmas, many laborers found themselves unemployed and often took to drinking and committing crimes. Historically, this has resulted in the holiday season having a mixed reputation, inspiring tales of Krampus and other demonic beings bent on destruction and wrongdoing. Magnus even stated that the so-called werewolves that ravaged the Baltics emptied tons of beer or mead from village cellars. However, as convincing as this explanation may first seem, there is a major flaw. Whilst bandits marauding across the countryside are of course a common occurrence in history, they are not commonly known for devouring human flesh en masse. This is a far more bestial, far darker trait. A trait which is perhaps only reserved for unnatural creatures like werewolves. On the 29th of August 1677, Christoph Hasemann was found on the floor convulsing violently whilst he was working in a small castle in Potterbrunn, Austria. The authorities took him in for questioning, initially believing him to be bewitched and that he himself was possibly a witch. There was a reason for the authorities' paranoia. This was the age of witch hunts. In nearby Salzburg, such inquests were commonplace and would continue to be until 1690, claiming more than 100 lives in the process. Hasemann was initially in very real danger, yet the story that he told the authorities quickly made them reassess the situation. He explained that he was not bewitched, but rather he had made a deal with the devil and was now demonically possessed. Hasemann explained that 9 years ago the devil appeared to him whilst he was an impoverished painter. The devil tempted him repeatedly, hounded him, offering him money, power, and women, until finally he succumbed on the 9th temptation. The reason he finally agreed to strike a deal was because the devil promised to cure his depression, which he had suffered since the recent loss of his father. 2 pacts were then supposedly signed between him and the devil, one in ink, the other in blood. Hasemann pledged in those agreements that in return he would give himself, body and soul, to the devil in 9 years' time on the 24th of September. At the time of his arrest, this was only a few weeks away. When the local Catholic priest Leopold Braun heard Hasemann's story, he took pity on him, describing him as a miserable man. The priest wrote to a nearby abbey and asked them to assist him. They, in due course, accepted Hasemann, and the monks there started to perform severe exorcisms. Hasemann was dutifully penitent and did everything they told him. Yet, at midnight on the 8th of September, he met the devil again. The monks attested that, whilst holding him in a state of agony, Hasemann freed himself and ran to their chapel, only to return with a piece of paper some time later. Hasemann claimed that the piece of paper was the contract written in blood many years ago. He said that he had snatched the accursed pact from the very claws of the devil, who appeared to him in the form of a winged dragon. The monastery popularized his case as a miracle. However, it was not to last, for by the 11th of October, Hasemann's convulsions were back. Not only that, they were worse than ever, sometimes leaving him entirely paralyzed. During these episodes, he later testified to being tormented not only by the devil, but by the Virgin Mary and Christ. The devil with his customary temptations, and Christ and Mary demanding he renounce worldly possessions and become a man of God. Again, Hasemann underwent exorcisms, and this time received the pact he had made in ink from the devil. After this, he joined a monastery and became a monk. There, he completed several paintings of the devil in his different incarnations, including an especially grand piece in which he painted the Virgin Mary helping him to retrieve the pact in ink from the devil. The torments, however, never stopped. They would plague Hasemann for the rest of his life until he died in the year 1700, peaceful and of good comfort. Whilst in ancient times witchcraft was viciously pursued if it was thought to have caused intentional harm, Europeans in early modern times persecuted witches on principle. Nowhere is this more evident than in the witchcraft trials that occurred in the Holy Roman Empire, where thousands were tied up and wed to the flames. Rarely was the morality of such violent and widespread persecution of supposed witches questioned. That was until the prosecution of Dorothea Flock in the Bavarian town of Bamberg. Her story was not only incredibly tragic, but symptomatic of everything that was wrong with the witch hunt fever that gripped the times. Dorothea was the second wife of Bamberg's government councillor, George Heinrich Flock. George had remarried after overcoming the loss of his first wife, who had been persecuted for being a witch, and met the flames in May 1628. In a cruel twist of fate, his second wife, Dorothea, began to tread the very same path in December 1629. Initially, it was an anonymous accusation of adultery that landed Dorothea in prison. After her arrest, she managed to escape, most likely fearing the unreasonable courts of the time and their seemingly insatiable appetite for persecuting women. Unfortunately, she was caught. Only now she was accused of witchcraft. Tragically experienced after the loss of his first wife, George immediately fled to Nuremberg, where he appealed to Dorothea's highly influential family, the Hoffmanns, for help. Together they contacted influential nobles, religious authorities, and even the Infanta of Spain for assistance. These measures helped delay Dorothea's trial and made her imprisonment more comfortable. They could not, however, secure her release. It was not until George went personally to the Aulic Council, one of the supreme courts of the Holy Roman Empire, that he was able to achieve anything substantial. The council mandated that any decision should be delayed until the birth of Dorothea's child, as she was pregnant when she was arrested. Her pregnancy delayed proceedings until 6 weeks after giving birth. Once her body ceased to contain an innocent child, it was roughly given over to the witch hunters. They examined her, and under duress, Dorothea confessed to all allegations. During this time, the Aulic Council had also been busy and had drafted a mandate for her release. Yet, when the mandate arrived in Bamberg, Dorothea's ashes were being gathered from the pyre. The witch hunters, upon hearing that the mandate was on its way, had accelerated Dorothea's execution. Infatuated with what they believed to be a righteous battle against the damnable art of witchcraft, the witch hunters made sure that red-hot pincers and flames were given to Dorothea instead of freedom. After this travesty, a resistance circle was formed in Nuremberg called the Hoffmanns' Friendship, in memoriam of Dorothea's family name, which rallied broad support against the injustices inherent in witchcraft trials. In Greek mythology, the souls of the departed travel to the underworld after death. Sometimes called Hades in reference to its patron god, the underworld is described as a dark, sunless region, located either beneath the greatest depths of the earth,
composed of baryons or atomic particles. However, baryonic matter is thought to make up only a small fraction. Speculate. 2015, a debate was hosted by Neil deGrasse area of the universe. The Millennium Simulator, run at the Max Planck Institute of Astrophysics in Germany, provides us with a simulated map of the universe's energy and matter distribution. Paired with studies and observations, one of cosmic background radiation, scientists have been able to discover these supervoids. These voids take up astronomical amounts of space and occupy the majority of the volume of the universe. But what may surprise you is that we in the Milky Way galaxy are living inside the largest supervoid known to science. The KBC void was first discovered in 2013 by astronomers Brian Keenan, Amy Barger, and Lennox Cowie, thus granting its name. Through further study, the KBC void was observed to be a massive 2 billion light-years in size, larger than any other supervoid observed in our universe so far. This means where we are living right now is particularly devoid of energy compared to most of the rest of the universe. This is an area where even dark matter is relatively absent. But why could that be? Many questions arise about our supervoid that are still completely unexplained. Scientists are still unsure exactly why our region of the universe is so devoid of energy. The matter-power spectrum, as described by physicist Victor T. Toth, gives us a general understanding of how matter ends up distributed less densely in voids, but does nothing to explain the reasons why our cosmic neighborhood is mostly vacant. It is especially curious that an area so devoid of matter would also be the only known place in the universe for life to have developed. Though maybe this explains why other stars in our cosmic neighborhood have no signs of life. Are we the loneliest life forms in the universe? It could possibly be so. While questions plague our understanding of our place in the universe, cosmic voids might end up holding more answers to the secrets of the universe than we ever thought possible. The complete lack of matter throughout the majority of the KBC void makes it much easier to detect when matter actually is present. This means that if we were to try and find some way to detect dark matter in nature, there is almost no better place to be running these kinds of experiments than in our own supervoid. Our supervoid may also help clarify what dark energy is, as we can learn a lot about the way our universe expands by observing the behavior on the rims of our galactic void. In a universe full of mysteries, it's almost reassuring to know that one of the best ways of finding answers might be starting in the void. The giant ground sloth. Standing as tall as an elephant, weighing 4 tons and equipped with huge claws, the ground sloth is a far cry from its slow modern ancestor. These huge shaggy beasts had a wide range, living throughout much of North and South America. And although the ground sloth was a herbivore, its huge bulk and wickedly sharp claws meant it would have commanded respect from even the fiercest predators. It's believed to have gone extinct around 10,000 years ago. However, in the dense Amazon, sightings persist of a strange creature locals called the Mapinguari, described as a massive, furry creature with huge claws and a vicious attitude. Could it be possible that the population of giant ground sloths survived the Ice Age in South America, one of their largest strongholds, and now live in the near impenetrable depths of the Amazon? What do you think? The short-faced bear. The largest land predator alive today is the formidable polar bear, standing up to 10 feet tall and weighing more than 800 pounds. It's the king of its domain. However, it's a teddy bear in comparison to its ancient cousin, standing 13 feet on its hind legs, weighing just shy of a ton, and with a mouth big enough to fit a human skull inside with room to spare. Arctodus, or as it's better known, the short-faced bear, is the biggest meat-eating mammal ever to walk on land. Brutish bear roamed Ice Age North America, hunting down bison and horses, and even chased off other predators from their kills. Although scientists speculate it died out around 10,000 BC, there are strange sightings which could suggest Arctodus made it through. Native American legends have always told of bears much bigger than the usual that cannot be harmed by spears and bows. In 1854, Inuit hunters in northern Canada shot a huge bear unlike anything they'd seen before. They contacted naturalist Robert McFarlane, and after examining the skin and skull of the specimen, McFarlane found that its fur was light yellow, unlike the brown and black bears of the region. Its skull was also unlike any bear he had ever seen, leading McFarlane to declare the specimen as a new species. Sadly, the remains are too old and degraded to be examined conclusively today, so the true identity of McFarlane's bear still remains uncertain. The moa. Mammals were not the only family to grow to huge sizes during the Ice Age. Hidden away on the isolated island of New Zealand was the moa, a gigantic flightless bird that stood 12 feet tall and weighed more than a horse. Despite its imposing size, the moa was in fact a peaceful plant-eater, and this was inevitably its downfall, as when settlers from Polynesia arrived, they found the slow, gentle moa an easy target, leading them to be hunted to extinction around 12,000 years ago. However, rumours persist of the moa's existence on the island, with locals reporting strange bird calls unlike any ever heard before, and huge 3-toed tracks have allegedly been found in the dense forests. The most compelling piece of evidence comes in the form of a 1993 photograph taken by hotel owner Paddy Freeney. Freeney claims that he and 2 others were hiking in the mountains of Arthur's Pass when they spotted the huge bird standing next to a stream. After spotting the group, the moa fled, but Freeney was able to take what he claims was a hasty photograph of the bird running away. The photo itself is unfortunately too blurry to be easily identified. But what do you think? Do you think somewhere out there the moa still exists, quietly getting on with its life away from human civilization? Megalania. Australia is well known for its vast array of unique wildlife, like the platypus or echidna. But during the Pleistocene era, the animals were even stranger, and they all lived in fear of one creature, the Megalania. Nothing like Megalania had walked the earth since the days of the dinosaurs. A gigantic monitor lizard, bigger than a crocodile, with a mouthful of razor-sharp teeth, lined with venom that stalked the deserts of Australia. In fact, the Megalania was so terrifying that it's still talked about to this day in Aboriginal folklore. So imagine if this living nightmare had survived until the present. European settlers recorded sightings of massive lizards as soon as they arrived on the Australian continent. And in 1890, newspapers reported an Australian village was besieged by a massive unknown reptile which killed livestock. But much more recent sightings have been reported. For example, in 1970, a surveyor in Alice Springs reported that while doing his job, he saw what he had first believed to be a large log suddenly stand up and skulk off into the undergrowth. In 1979, Australian cryptozoologist Rex Gilroy was contacted by a cattle farmer who claimed he saw a lizard in excess of 20 feet long on his property. Plaster casts were made of its tracks, and Gilroy also related a story that a former Australian Special Ops soldier who wished to remain anonymous had told him. While on a training exercise in the rainforests of the Normanby Range, his unit came upon a dead cow which had been dragged into the jungles and ripped to pieces. All around its body were huge lizard tracks up to 2 feet across. Saber-toothed cat. Arguably the most iconic of all Ice Age creatures, the saber-toothed cat, or Smilodon, were killing machines. Huge, fast, and massively powerful. The saber-toothed cat would pounce upon prey, wrestle it down, and then put its infamous 11-inch fangs to lethal use, severing the jugular vein and windpipe in one ruthless bite. Truly a fearsome beast, the saber-toothed family conquered both South and North America, up until the very end of the Ice Age. The locals of the Anidi Plateau in Chad, Africa, tell tales of a big cat unlike the others that live there. They say it's much bigger, with dark fur and black stripes, and most telling of all, its fangs protrude from its mouth. In 1910, French missionaries traversing the Bemigo River reported that one of their party was attacked and killed by what they could only describe as a water tiger. And in 1920, not far from where the incident occurred, hunter Marcel Harley came across a dead hippo that was covered in massive slash wounds. Most recently of all, in 1975, while on a hunting expedition on the plateau, Christian Leno heard a strange roaring coming from a nearby cave. His local guide claimed it was the sound of the fabled big cat, and he refused to carry on the hunt. Is it possible that the apex predator of the Ice Age has survived in this remote corner of Africa, cut off from the rest of the world? What do you think? Sombath Somphone. For over 20 years, Sombath Somphone was a respected international figure, helping create new methods of sustainable farming and agricultural practices, while teaching students about the importance of eco-friendly living. Since he returned to Lao People's Democratic Republic after the end of the Vietnam War, Somphone had received numerous awards and distinctions for his work to improve the quality of life, not just in Laos, but around the world. Not only that, but he managed to stay out of politics throughout his career in community development, appealing to wide audiences regardless of political affiliation. A rare feat for someone so global, and a major reason why his mysterious disappearance makes such little sense. On the evening of December the 15th, 2012, Somphone was driving his Jeep through the Vientiane, Laos, when he was pulled over on the side of a highway by police. The police approached his vehicle and talked for a few moments. Somphone then exits his jeep and joins the officers. A few seconds pass before a man in black arrives on a motorcycle and rushes to team up with the police. The man in black then gets in the jeep and drives away. Not long after, a man in white appears and waits at the scene. A pickup truck arrives and the man in white hops in, along with 2 other people, including Somphone. Another motorcyclist behind the outpost appears and talks to police, before seemingly firing a few rounds of ammunition. The truck then leaves while police check the abandoned motorcycle. The man in white comes back and drags it out of the frame, clearing the scene. It was the last time Somphone would ever be seen again. Soon after the CCTV footage was captured, the government swiftly denied any responsibility in the kidnapping of Sombath Somphone. However, most prominent governing officials of international countries weren't convinced. Many global factitious pushed officials to contribute as many resources as possible to find Somphone, but urgent action was never carried out. Even prominent American politicians, such as Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, voiced their concern for the well-being of Somphone and their anger at the lack of resources spent in the search. Because the CCTV footage was never officially made public, no detailed investigation into the video have been announced. All we can do is speculate why the police were so interested in Somphone, or if they were truly police at all. The man in black and the man in white also add a bizarre twist, as their actions seem quite calculated and planned out. Somphone was a simple man who did only good for his community and nation. He had 0 reasons to fear for his life, made no enemies, and worked to sustain peace. The only reasonable explanation is the people who kidnapped Somphone were agents of chaos, devoted to removing a symbol of good that was Sombath Somphone. Let's hope that one day the Lao government will commit a proper investigation to uncover the truth. The disappearance of Corey McKeague. In the early morning hours of September the 24th, 2016, Royal Air Force Regiment gunner Corey McKeague went out drinking with some friends in Forest Street Airport, UK. He drove into town with the intention of leaving his car overnight and ended up in the Flex nightclub, which he was seen leaving alone sometime after midnight. The doorman of the club claimed he asked Corey to leave due to how drunk he was, and Corey left without issue. From there, he wandered to Mamma Mia's restaurant, his well-known favourite takeout. He was seen sometime between 1:15 and 1:30 a.m. It would be about 2 hours later, at 3:25 a.m, that Corey was captured on CCTV footage walking down Brent Govell Street into the Horseshoe area. He was alone, and police concluded that he had been sleeping in the doorway of an unidentified establishment before awakening and wandering off. This would sadly become the last time anyone saw Corey. Authorities believe that he had no intentions of walking 10 miles back to the RAF Honington base where he lived. However, Corey's friends did mention that it was common for Corey to drive into town, grab some food, and sleep wherever he could on weekends. Corey was reported missing on Monday, September the 26th, when he failed to report for work. Police established that Corey's mobile phone had travelled along the A1101 corridor up north to Barton Mills the morning of his disappearance. The trip only took 28 minutes, meaning Corey couldn't have made it while walking. Investigators drove up and down the road where a bin lorry had made its rounds that morning, thinking the phone had ended up in the trash. It was either switched off or damaged at around 8 a.m, but unfortunately it was never found. It was also established that in the area in which Corey was last seen walking into was a cul-de-sac containing multiple wheelie bins. Because CCTV footage never captured Corey leaving the Horseshoe, police thought Corey may have fallen asleep in one of the bins and become trapped when a bin lorry picked it up the next morning. This would explain the faster movement of his mobile phone, but would also lead investigators to believe Corey had then been subsequently hurt by either the garbage compactor or landfill incinerator. For months on end, police scoured railroads, lorry routes, and even spent millions of pounds searching landfills. They never found any DNA evidence or partial remains of Corey or his phone. However, authorities say that it would be almost impossible to pinpoint such evidence in landfills, contaminated with other human DNA, and vast amounts of rubbish. But the lorry landfill death is the popular hypothesis of most researchers. Corey's family has its doubts, however. It's important to note that the CCTV cameras at the last sighting of Corey turned off at noon the day of the disappearance, and were never checked for the night's footage before it expired. Thus Corey could have fallen asleep in the cul-de-sac and left the next afternoon. In fact, one of the people seen leaving the area on CCTV footage in the late morning was wearing coloured shorts that were similar to ones that Corey had worn earlier on his final day. Other theories suggest there was a third party involved in Corey's disappearance, possibly picking up in his stepper and taking him who knows where. It might sound strange for a military man to be kidnapped, but there were some parallels to an attempted kidnapping at the nearby RAF Marham base in July. Everyone involved with the case decided that Corey would not have voluntarily went AWOL, and he was in good mental standing with his girlfriend, his friends, and the fact that his bank account and social media accounts were never changed after his disappearance. However, police won't rule out the possibility he got into a stranger's car that morning for a ride, and ended up with the wrong people at the wrong time. In the end, it's impossible to confirm what exactly happened.
Tonight, I'll be eating chicken tikka masala with garlic naan. Cheers.
I win again. Patrick.
That's Sir Patrick.
Ooh, sir.
New Robitussin Naturals, powered by the best of nature, crafted with real true source honey, plus ivy leaf to relieve your cough and help clear mucus. but free from artificial colors, flavors, and preservatives. Discover the family of new Robitussin Naturals.
We're playing, cooling. It's like a vlog, family trip. So I'm quarantined. I'm gonna do quarantine counts.
What's the secret to perfect pasta? The Barilla commitment to uncompromising quality, sourcing the best possible wheat, and creating a custom blend of grains that cooks perfectly al dente. So you can bring more than great pasta to the table. You can bring
Have you ever thought about polishing your skin? Dove Exfoliating Body Polish exfoliates and nourishes.
This week on BuzzFeed Unsolved, we cover the Axeman Killer of New Orleans, one of the strangest serial killer cases I've ever read.
And you've read a lot.
Yeah, I read a lot in my time.
You're a sicko.
I'm not a sicko, I'm interested in Okay, maybe I'm a little weird, but this guy had a flair for the dramatic. I think you're going to enjoy it.
Okay, all right.
Let's get into it.
Starting in 1918, over a period of roughly 18 months, the city of New Orleans and surrounding areas were rocked by a serial killer that would later go by the name the Axeman. The Axeman was the manifestation of the boogeyman, lurking in the shadows of New Orleans, almost exclusively attacking at night, and is possibly responsible for 12 attacks and 6 killings. In chilling fashion, he only seemed to strike people while they slept in their beds.
I love this right off the bat.
What do you love about it?
Well, I'll tell you what. I love it when serial killers have a fun little thing. I don't approve of serial killers, but I think if you're gonna kill a bunch of people, you might as well have some fun with it.
I feel like you have baseball cards of this guy.
I absolutely do not. They don't make serial killer baseball cards, though, do they?
If they did, you'd probably own them.
You would own them.
No, I think
in
you
a
would own them
heartbeat.
too.
You'd
I'd
be
own
like,
them.
I'll trade you a Gacy for a...
I'd trade you a Gacy for a Zodiac.
Yeah.
The Axeman eerily never used his own tools. He only used what he could find on hand in the victims' households, usually an axe, which he typically left behind at the scene of the crime.
Everybody had an axe back in the day, huh?
Yeah, you know, my biggest takeaway from this case is why not just throw your axe away? Yeah, it's literally the first thing I would do. But these people were like, leave the axe in the shed.
Hope he doesn't take my axe. I've got my porch axe, my shed axe, my kitchen axe.
His creepy tendencies now established. Let's get into the timeline. On May 23rd, 1918 at 4901 Magnolia Street, the first suspected Axeman attack occurred. Catherine and Joseph Maggio were struck violently by an axe, a straight razor used on their throats.
Wait, he hit him with the axe and then cut their throats?
I don't know.
It also could have been his, since it was his first one, he was figuring out if
he was
going to be.
dabbling in,
He was
like,
like,
different
either
things.
I'll be the Axeman or
I'll be
the Razor Boy. Razor Boy would be a good sidekick for him.
Razor Boy's nuts.
Axeman and Razor Boy?
Axeman, I think, strikes a little bit more fear into my heart than Razor Boy.
Lock your doors, Razor Boy's out tonight.
Catherine had been almost entirely decapitated, and Joseph had suffered many severe injuries. The bodies were discovered by Joseph's brothers, who lived in the same house. Nothing was heard or seen, and no valuables were taken. The bottom panel of the kitchen door was knocked out. All that was found was an axe.
So he probably went back here through the back door, because that's usually how he did it.
I assume the only people who saw him were the ones who were killed.
Some of them survived, and they would just report like a large looming figure, like a dark figure. So he really did become kind of like a boogeyman. It kind of gives me the creeps.
There are beads everywhere in this town.
That means
New Orleans. Fingerprinting was around at the time, but was allegedly not yet a standard procedure. A little over a month later, on June 28, 1918, near the corner of Dorgenois and La Harpe Streets, another attack occurred. A severely injured Louis Bessemer and Anna Lowe were discovered by a baker named John Zanka making morning deliveries.
That's sad for a baker.
They actually thought he did it.
They thought the baker did it?
Well, I mean, like anybody naturally. That's why if I ever found a dead body, I don't know if I'd call it in, man.
You wouldn't call it in?
I'd call it in anonymously. I would not want any part of it because that's the first person they look at.
But in today's surveillance state, you would be suspect number one because they'd be like, what? Why'd you call it in anonymously?
Well, then maybe I'll just spend my whole life trying to avoid dead bodies. How about that? Also, this guy didn't know. He was just delivering bread. He opened the door.
He was probably like, good morning, I've got your beignet. Oh my God.
Louis would actually survive the attack, and Anna would survive for another 7 weeks before dying. Anna supposedly recounted to the police that a large white man with a hatchet had attacked them. The bottom panel of their bedroom door was missing, and once again, a bloody axe was left at the scene.
Another beautiful street, though.
It is a beautiful street. The trees in this area are just so nice.
Sometimes even the most beautiful places hold the darkest secrets, though.
Profound. Okay.
Roughly a month later, on August 5th, 1918, in an undisclosed home location, Mrs. Ed Schneider was found by her husband in the afternoon at their home. Mrs. Schneider was still alive and rushed to Charity Hospital and would reportedly survive the attack. Upon investigation, it was discovered that their axe was missing from their shed. Mrs. Schneider was also pregnant, and I'm happy to report that in the week following the attack, she successfully gave birth.
Good for her.
Yeah,
that's something.
That's a super mom right there.
Is that the only axe baby out of this whole story?
I think that's.
Can you imagine being an axe baby?
I don't know if that's a thing.
I'd go around telling everybody, one of one.
My mom took a
one of a kind baby, axe baby.
My mom took some hard steel to the noggin, and then I popped out.
Jesus.
5 days later, on August 10th, 1918, reportedly near Tonti and Gravier Street, 80-year-old Joseph Romano was found by his nieces Pauline and Mary after they heard him struggling. His head was bashed in. The two girls allegedly saw the attacker and described him as, quote, dark, tall, heavy-set, wearing a dark suit and a black slouch hat, end quote. Joseph Romano would die 2 days later.
This guy sounds like the villain from Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Yeah, he does. What's a slouch hat?
I think it's, I don't know. I was about to talk out of my ass there. Are you gonna Google that?
I'm gonna look up a slouch hat, because that sounds like something I need.
Right now we're at the site of the 4th attack.
Think the yellow house?
It may be. We just know it was on this corner.
Honestly, this Axeman might just be a fan of quaint houses.
He's a fan of corners too.
Not that it's okay to kill anybody, but the elderly above all.
Yeah. Really, at least he lived a full life, right?
No. You're right, actually.
Well, he didn't. I'm sure that's not how he wanted to go out when he was picturing retirement.
Well, nobody does.
Getting
but
hit with an axe.
I rescind my statement. Maybe if you're gonna be a serial killer,
Maybe kill elderly people.
kill the elderly.
That's a weird thing to advocate, but
I mean, but they've lived a long life.
that's true.
Around this time, August 1918, the New Orleans State's newspaper allegedly recounted, quote, "Armed men are keeping watch over their sleeping families, while the police are seeing to solve the mysteries of the axe attacks. Extra police are being put to work daily," end quote. And when looking at the timeline, it apparently worked. For a while, that is. As nearly 7 months later, on March 10th, 1919, the Cortimiglia family was attacked. Rose Cortimiglia woke to her husband Charles fighting the Axeman, a fight that Charles would lose. Rose and their 2-year-old daughter Mary were also attacked. Rose and Charles would actually survive, but their daughter tragically did not. In typical Axeman fashion, the axe used belonged to the Cortimiglias.
Did they call it Axeman fever or Axemania?
Or did they call him Axie?
Were they like, everybody in town's got Axeman fever as the terror continues to grip the community?
This just in, throw away your axes.
It's just in, more skulls crushed. Whoa, throw out your axes.
5 days later, a New Orleans newspaper called the Times-Picayune received a letter from the apparent Axeman. Quote, "Hell, March 13th, 1919. Esteemed mortal, they have never caught me and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether which surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a fell demon from hot as hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman," end quote.
This guy's a poet laureate.
No.
This is incredible. Was this Robert Frost?
He also goes on to insult and threaten the police. Quote, "They have been so utterly stupid so as to amuse not only me, but his satanic majesty. But tell them to beware. Let them not try to discover what I am, for it were better that they never were born than for them to incur the wrath of the Axeman," end quote.
It is very Old Testament.
It's like most serial killers just like to stroke themselves, and this is just...
He was right, and he was like,
judged.
the devil, his satanic majesty. That'll get him. Time to go murder again.
He also goes on to remind the people that he could be worse. Quote, "Undoubtedly, you Orleanians think of me as a most horrible murderer, which I am, but I could be much worse if I wanted to. At will, I could slay thousands of your best citizens, for I am in close relationship with the angel of death," end quote.
Not to discredit him, but he is killing people in their sleep with an axe. And what's his success rate?
I gotta say, your striking power and aim isn't Johnny on the spot.
Yeah, you should be batting 1,000 at that point.
You should be batting 1,000.
However, the most important clause is a specific threat that would terrify the entire New Orleans community. Quote, "Now, to be exact, at 12:15 o'clock earthly time, on next Tuesday night, I'm going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I'm going to make a little proposition to the people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose house a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for the people. One thing is certain, and that is some of those persons who do not jazz it on Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe."
Jazz it!
Quote.
You better jazz it!
He turned jazz into
Honey,
a verb.
we gotta jazz it.
He turned jazz into a
I'm not
verb.
gonna throw out this axe, so we better jazz it. He's a bit like Santa Claus.
Okay, I'd like
First
to hear
of all, he
how...
says he's gonna pass over New Orleans. That's a bit magical. Just
Sure.
imagine him flying through the skies with his big axe, riding a crocodile or an alligator, whatever they got.
Or a demon.
Traveling on demon's wings and just looking down at all the little houses, listening for jazz. It's like the good and the
So
bad.
he's like the Grinch trying to listen to the Whoville people sing.
Exactly right.
I still don't understand how he's Santa Claus. Santa Claus never bashed anyone's head in with a big sack of toys.
That's true. But he does give him coal.
What?
This letter would later spark the creation of a jazz song entitled "Don't Scare Me Papa," also known as the Mysterious Axeman's Jazz. The Tuesday night mentioned in the letter was March 19th, 1919. It is said that the city was truly alive that night, as people blasted jazz music in their homes, and those who did not have a record player poured into local jazz clubs to stay clear of the Axeman's wrath. It's worth mentioning that nobody was killed on March 19th, 1919.
So he kept to his word. Apparently everyone was jazzing it.
You know what? He was probably just going to be out of town.
He thought, wouldn't this be funny?
I've got a business trip that weekend.
Let's see how many smokers I can make dance.
Yeah.
On August 10th, 1919, Steve Boca was badly injured in his home after he awoke to a man next to his bed with an axe. Boca managed to survive the attack, reportedly staggering to a friend's home, who then called the police. Boca did not regain his memory, likely due to the blows to the head.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah, that usually does it.
Yeah.
I once fell into a pile of bricks when I was a kid.
What?
And I don't remember much of it after that.
What?
Yeah, I was climbing because we were playing hide and seek. I was trying to hide, and I thought I had the best hiding spot. Turns out I was wrong. The branch broke, and I just.
This explains a lot. You fell into.
And after that, I could see ghosts.
I don't think it gave you the vision.
It gave me my eyes.
I think it put a hole in your brain.
Later that month, or in early September, on 2128 2nd Street, 19-year-old Sarah Lawman was reportedly attacked by someone who entered through an open window. When she regained consciousness, she could not recall details of the attack.
So this is the site of the second to last attack. And apparently the house is gone.
Yeah.
About 2 months later, on October 27th, 1919, at the corner of South Scott and Ulloa Street, the suspected Axeman attacked Esther and Mike Pepitone. Esther reportedly awoke around 1 a.m. to her husband screaming and ran to the bedroom. Her husband's head was struck 18 times and died 2 hours later. Esther saw 2 figures in the bedroom, but could not identify them as they fled the scene.
By the way, 2 figures.
Razor Boy.
Oh my God, no.
He's back.
No, we're not going.
He's back from boarding school.
A bolt with a heavy nut, something used to secure a circus tent, was one of the apparent weapons. There was a circus on the nearby Tulane Avenue that weekend.
Was this the last one?
Yes.
If this guy survived for 2 hours after getting struck 18 times, the Axeman probably wasn't used to that kind of resilience. He probably hit him once and the guy was like, oh boy, what a bump. And he was like, all right, I guess I'll hit you again. He was like, oh my goodness, that didn't feel much better. He was like, 3, 4, 5.
This takes us to the supposed end of the Axeman's killing spree. And with that, let's get into the theories. The first theory is that perhaps not all of the killings were the work of the Axeman. Some speculate that the Axeman's presumed final killing of Mike Pepitone was actually a mafia killing, due to Mike Pepitone's father killing a man in the past. Another Axeman attack that is scrutinized is the second attack on Louis Bessemer and Anna Lowe. If you'll recall, Louis Bessemer was severely injured, and his partner Anna Lowe was killed in that same attack. However, Bessemer was charged with the murder of Anna in bizarre fashion. Police found that Bessemer had written letters back and forth in Yiddish and Russian. They eventually came to the conclusion that Bessemer was part of a German spy ring or spy master for the Kaiser, and the attack had nothing to do with the Axeman.
A spy's not gonna bash someone's head in with an axe.
And then bash his own head in.
Right. He's gonna lower a string from the ceiling and put a drop of poison on it and let that poison fall into a sleeping person's mouth. Right in there.
Well, if they're sleeping, then why don't you just drop it into their mouth like a little droplet thing? Why
I don't know. That's what spies do. That's just what they do.
That's the first time I've heard that. I think you just
Everybody does that.
I think you made it up.
I did not make it up.
Okay.
It happens in a James Bond film.
Which one?
The racist one, where he's in Japan.
Before dying, Anna Lowe allegedly blamed her partner Louis Bessemer and said that he was a Nazi spy. They also theorized that this case was a domestic dispute that ended with Louis attacking Anna. Nonetheless, Louis Bessemer was acquitted. There were definitely things that suggested this was the work of the Axeman, mainly the fact that it happened at home at night while they were sleeping with an axe.
That would take such an enormous amount of fortitude to be able to, really smash someone. And then also, I have a hard time pulling off a Band-Aid.
Though you are a wimp, and if anyone would have mental fortitude to do something that would be painful, it would be a spy, wouldn't they?
I just think it's very rich that you're calling me a wimp.
Yeah.
Because you hear a footstep and you go into,
ooh, I better hide under the bed.
In vain with this theory, it's also speculated on the internet that some of the killings of the Axeman could have been the work of a copycat. The second theory is that given the context of his bizarre letter, Some believe the Axeman to be a supernatural figure that could slip through tiny entranceways and become the large man that witnesses describe the killer to be.
No.
It's just a theory.
Well, it's dumb. He shrunk down like a little mouse? Is that what you're saying? He's like Ant-Man? He's like, now I'm big, time to die.
At what
The last theory is actually a legitimate suspect, a man named Joseph Mumfree. To start on Mumfree, let's return to the Axeman's last crime, the attack on Esther and Mike Pepitone. If you recall, Esther survived the attack and her husband did not. Esther later moved to Los Angeles and remarried to a man named Angelo Albano. However, on the second anniversary of her former husband Mike's death by the Axeman, her current husband Angelo disappeared and was never found again. Esther recalled that before their marriage, Angelo had ended business relations with a man who went by many names, including Joseph Mumfree. On December 5th, 1921, Mumfree visited Esther's home at 550